Section 16 of Logic by Isaac Watts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Special Rules to Direct Us in Judging of Particular, Part 2. Section 4. Principles and Rules of Judgment in Matter of Human Prudence. The great design of prudence, as distinct from morality and religion, is to determine and manage every affair with decency and to the best advantage. That is decent which is agreeable to our state, condition, or circumstances, whether it be in behavior, discourse, or action. That is advantageous which attains the most and best purposes, and avoids the most and greatest inconveniencies. As there is infinite variety in the circumstances of persons, things, actions, times, and places, so we must be furnished with such general rules as are accommodable to all this variety by a wise judgment and discretion. For what is an act of consummate prudence in some times, places, and circumstances would be consummate folly in others. Now these rules may be ranged in the following manner. 1. Our regard to persons or things should be governed by the degrees of concernment we have with them, the relation we have to them, or the expectation we have from them. These should be the measures by which we should proportion our diligence and application in anything that relates to them. 2. We should always consider whether the thing we pursue be attainable, whether it be worthy our pursuit, whether it be worthy the degree of pursuit, whether it be worthy of the means used in order to attain it. This rule is necessary both in matters of knowledge and matters of practice. 3. When the advantages and disadvantages, conveniencies and inconveniencies of any action are balanced together, we must finally determine on that side which has the superior weight, and the sooner in things which are necessarily and speedily to be done or determined. 4. If advantages and disadvantages in their own nature are equal, then those which are most certain or likely as to the event should turn the scale of our judgment and determine our practice. 5. Where the improbabilities of success or advantage are greater than the probabilities, it is not prudence to act or venture if the action may be attended with danger or loss equal to the proposed gain. It is proper to inquire whether this be not the case in almost all lotteries, for they that hold stakes will certainly secure part to themselves, and only the remainder being divided into prizes must render the improbability of gain to each adventurer greater than the probability. 6. We should not despise or neglect any real advantage and abandon the pursuit of it, though we cannot attain all the advantages that we desire. This would be to act like children who are fond of something which strikes their fancy most, and sullen and regardless of everything else, if they are not humoured in that fancy. 7. Though a general knowledge of things be useful in science and in human life, yet we should content ourselves with a more superficial knowledge of those things which have the least relation to our chief end and design. 8. This rule holds good also in matters of business and practice as well as in matters of knowledge, and therefore we should not grasp at everything, lest in the end we attain nothing. Persons that either by an inconstancy of temper or by a vain ambition will pursue every sort of art and science, study and business, seldom grow excellent in any one of them, and projectors who form 20 schemes seldom use sufficient application to finish one of them, or make it turn to good account. 9. Take heed of delaying and trifling amongst the means instead of reaching at the end. Take heed of wasting a life in mere speculative studies, which is called to action and employment. Dwell not too long in philosophical, mathematical, or grammatical parts of learning, when your chief design is law, physic, or divinity. Do not spend the day in gathering flowers by the wayside, lest night should come upon you before you arrive at your journey's end, and then you will not reach it. 10. Where the case and circumstances of wise and good men resemble our own case and circumstances, we may borrow a great deal of instruction toward our prudent conduct from their example, as well as in all cases we may learn much from their conversation and advice. 11. After all other rules, remember this, that mere speculation in matters of human prudence can never be a perfect director without experience and observation. We may be content, therefore, in our younger years to commit some unavoidable mistakes in point of prudence, and we shall see mistakes enough in the conduct of others, both which ought to be treasured up amongst our useful observations, in order to teach us better judgment for time to come. Sometimes the mistakes, imprudences, and follies which ourselves or others have been guilty of give us brighter and more effectual lessons of prudence than the wisest counsels and the fairest examples could ever have done. Section 5. Principles and rules of judgment in matters of human testimony. The evidence of human testimony is not so proper to lead us into the knowledge of the essence and inward nature of things, as to acquaint us with the existence of things, and to inform us of matters of fact, both past and present. And though there be a great deal of fallibility in the testimony of men, yet there are some things we may be almost as certain of, as that the sun shines, or that 5 20s make 100. Who is there at London that knows anything of the world, but believes there is such a city as Paris in France, that the Pope dwells at Rome, that Julius Caesar was an emperor, or that Luther had a great hand in the Reformation? If we observe the following rules, we may arrive at such a certainty in many things of human testimony, as that it is morally impossible we should be deceived, that is, we may obtain a moral certainty. 1. Let us consider whether the thing reported be in itself possible. If not, it can never be credible, whosoever relates it. 2. Consider farther whether it be probable, whether there are any concurring circumstances to prove it, beside the mere testimony of the person that relates it. I confess, if these last conditions are wanting, the thing may be true, but then it ought to have the stronger testimony to support it. 3. Consider whether the person who relates it be capable of knowing the truth, whether he be a skilful judge in such matters, if it be a business of art, or a nice appearance in nature, or some curious experiment in philosophy. But if it be a mere occurrence in life, a plain sensible matter of fact, it is enough to inquire whether he who relates it were an eye or an ear witness, or whether he himself had it only by hearsay, or can trace it up to the original. 4. Consider whether the narrator be honest and faithful as well as skilful, whether he hath no bias upon his mind, no peculiar gain or profit by believing or reporting it, no interest or principle which might warp his own belief aside from truth, or which might tempt him to prevaricate, to speak falsely, or to give a representation a little different from the naked truth of things. In short, whether there be no occasion of suspicion concerning his report. 5. Consider whether several persons agree together in the report of this matter, and if so, then whether these persons who join together in their testimony might not be supposed to combine together in a falsehood. Whether there are persons of sufficient skill, probity, and credit. It might be also inquired whether they are of different nations, sects, parties, opinions, or interests. For the more divided they are in all these, the more likely is their report to be true, if they agree together in their account of the same thing, and especially if they persist in it without wavering. 6. Consider farther whether the report were capable of being easily refuted at first, if it had not been true. If so, this confirms the testimony. 7. Inquire yet again whether there has been a constant uniform tradition and belief of this matter from the very first age or time when the thing was transacted, without any reasonable doubts or contradictions. Or 8. If any part of it hath been doubted by any considerable persons, whether it has been searched out and afterwards confirmed, by having all the scruples and doubts removed. In either of these cases the testimony becomes more firm and credible. 9. Inquire, on the other hand, whether there are any considerable objections remaining against the belief of that proposition so attested. Whether there be anything very improbable in the thing itself, whether any concurrent circumstances seem to oppose it, whether any person or persons give a positive and plain testimony against it, whether they are equally skilful and equally faithful as those who assert it, whether there be as many or more in number, and whether they might have any secret bias or influence on them to contradict it. 10. Sometimes the entire silence of a thing may have something of weight towards the decision of a doubtful point of history, or a matter of human faith, namely, where the fact is pretended to be public, if the persons who are silent about it were skilful to observe, and could not but know such an occurrence, if they were engaged by principle or by interest to have declared it, if they had fair opportunity to speak of it, and these things may tend to make a matter suspicious, if it be not very well attested by positive proof. 11. Remember that in some reports there are more marks of falsehood than of truth, and in others there are more marks of truth than of falsehood. By a comparison of all these things together, and putting every argument on one side and the other into the balance, we must form as good a judgment as we can which side preponderates, and give a strong or a feeble assent or dissent, or withhold our judgment entirely, according to greater or lesser evidence, according to more plain or dubious marks of truth or falsehood. 12. Observe that in matters of human testimony there is oftentimes a great mixture of truth and falsehood in the report itself. Some parts of the story may be perfectly true, and some utterly false, and some may have such a blended confusion of circumstances, which are a little warped aside from the truth and misrepresented, that there is need of good skill and accuracy to form a judgment concerning them, and determine which part is true and which is false. The whole report is not to be believed because some parts are indubitably true, nor the whole to be rejected because some parts are as evident falsehoods. We may draw two remarkable observations from this section. Observation 1. How certain is the truth of the Christian religion, and particularly of the resurrection of Christ, which is a matter of fact on which Christianity is built. We have almost all the concurrent evidences that can be derived from human testimony joining to confirm this glorious truth. The fact is not impossible. Concurrent circumstances cast a favorable aspect on it. It was foretold by one who wrought miracles, and therefore not unlikely nor unexpected. The apostles and first disciples were eye and ear witnesses, for they conversed with their risen Lord. They were the most plain, honest men in themselves. The temptations of worldly interests did rather discourage their belief and report of it. They all agree in this matter, though they were men of different characters. Pharisees and fishermen and publicans, men of Judea and Galilee, and perhaps some heathens who were early converted. The thing might easily have been disproved if it were false. It hath been conveyed by constant tradition and writing down to our times. Those who at first doubted were afterwards convinced by certain proofs, nor have any pretended to give any proof of the contrary, but merely denied the fact with impudence in opposition to all these evidences. Observation 2. How weak is the faith which is due to a multitude of things in ancient human history, for though many of these criteria or marks of credibility are found plainly in the more general and public facts, yet as to a multitude of particular facts and circumstances, how deficient are they in such evidence as should demand our assent? Perhaps there is nothing that ever was done in all past ages, and which was not a public fact, so well attested as the resurrection of Christ. Section 6. Principles and Rules of Judgment in Matters of Divine Testimony. As human testimony acquaints us with matters of fact, both past and present, which lie beyond the reach of our own personal notice, so divine testimony is suited to inform us both of the nature of things, as well as matters of fact, and of things future, as well as present or past. Whatsoever is dictated to us by God himself, or by men who are divinely inspired, must be believed with full assurance. Reason demands us to believe whatsoever divine revelation dictates, for God is perfectly wise and cannot be deceived. He is faithful and good, and will not deceive his creatures. And when reason has found out the certain marks or credentials of divine testimony to belong to any proposition, there remains then no farther inquiry to be made, but only to find out the true sense and meaning of that which God has revealed, for reason itself demands the belief of it. Now, divine testimony or revelation requires these following credentials. 1. That the propositions or doctrines revealed be not inconsistent with reason, for intelligent creatures can never be bound to believe real inconsistencies. Therefore, we are sure the popish doctrine of transubstantiation is not a matter of divine revelation, because it is contrary to all our senses and our reason, even in their proper exercises. God can dictate nothing but what is worthy of himself and agreeable to his own nature and divine perfections. Now many of these perfections are discoverable by the light of reason, and whatsoever is inconsistent with these perfections cannot be a divine revelation. But let it be noted that in matters of practice towards our fellow creatures, God may command us to act in a manner contrary to what reason would direct antecedent to that command. So Abraham was commanded to offer up his son as sacrifice. The Israelites were ordered to borrow of the Egyptians without paying them, and to plunder and slay the inhabitants of Canaan, because God has a sovereign right to all things, and can with equity dispossess his creatures of life, and everything which he has given them, and especially such sinful creatures as mankind, and he can appoint whom he pleases to be the instruments of this just dispossession or deprivation, so that these divine commands are not really inconsistent with right reason, for whatsoever is so cannot be believed where that inconsistency appears. 2. Upon the same account, the whole doctrine of revelation must be consistent with itself. Every part of it must be consistent with each other, and though in points of practice latter revelation may repeal or cancel former divine laws, yet in matters of belief no latter revelation can be inconsistent with what has been heretofore revealed. 3. Divine revelation must be confirmed by some divine and supernatural appearances, some extraordinary signs or tokens, visions, voices, or miracles wrought, or prophecies fulfilled. There must be some demonstrations of the presence and power of God, superior to all the powers of nature, or the settled connection which God as Creator has established among His creatures in this visible world. 4. If there are any such extraordinary and wonderful appearances and operations brought to contest with, or to oppose divine revelation, there must and always will be such a superiority on the side of that revelation which is truly divine as to manifest that God is there. This was the case when the Egyptian sorcerers contended with Moses, but the wonders which Moses wrought did so far transcend the power of the magicians as made them confess it was the finger of God. 5. These divine appearances or attestations to revelation must be either known to ourselves by our own personal observation of them, or they must be sufficiently attested by others according to the principles and rules by which matters of human faith are to be judged in the foregoing section. Some of those who lived in the nations and ages where miracles were wrought were eye and ear witnesses of the truth and divinity of the revelation, but we who live in these distant ages must have them derived down to us by just and incontestable history and tradition. We also, even in these distant times, may see the accomplishment of some ancient predictions, and thereby obtain that advantage towards the confirmation of our faith in divine revelation, beyond what those persons enjoyed who lived when the predictions were pronounced. 6. There is another very considerable confirmation of divine testimony, and that is when the doctrines themselves, either on the publication or the belief of them, produce supernatural effects. Such were the miraculous powers which were communicated to believers in the first ages of Christianity, the conversion of Jews or Gentiles, the amazing success of the gospel of Christ without human aid, and in opposition to 1,000 impediments, its power in changing the hearts and lives of ignorant and vicious heathens, and wicked and profane creatures in all nations, and filling them with a spirit of virtue, piety, and goodness. Wheresoever persons have found this effect in their own hearts, wrought by a belief of the gospel of Christ, they have a witness in themselves of the truth of it, and abundant reason to believe it divine. Of the difference between reason and revelation, and in what sense the latter is superior, see more in Chapter 2, Section 9, and Chapter 4, Direction 6. Section 7, Principles and Rules of Judging concerning things past, present, and to come by the mere use of reason. Though we attain the greatest assurance of things past and future by divine faith, and learn many matters of fact, both past and present, by human faith, yet reason also may in a good degree assist us to judge of matters of fact, both past, present, and to come, by the following principles. 1. There is a system of beings round about us, of which we ourselves are a part, which we call the world, and in this world there is a course of nature, or a settled order of causes, effects, antecedents, concomitants, consequences, etc., from which the author of nature doth not vary but upon very important occasions. 2. Where antecedents, concomitants, and consequence, causes and effects, signs and things signified, subjects and adjuncts are necessarily connected with each other, we may infer the causes from the effects, and effects from the causes, the antecedents from the consequence, as well as consequence from the antecedents, etc., and thereby be pretty certain of many things, both past, present, and to come. It is by this principle that astronomers can tell what day and hour the sun and moon were eclipsed 500 years ago, and predict all future eclipses as long as the world shall stand. They can tell precisely at what minute the sun rises and sets this day at Peking in China, or what altitude the dog star had at midnight or mid-noon in Rome on the day when Julius Caesar was slain. Gardeners, upon the same principle, can foretell the months when every plant will be in bloom, and the ploughman knows the weeks of harvest. We are sure if there be a chicken, there was an egg. If there be a rainbow, we are certain it rains not far off. If we behold a tree growing on the earth, we know it has naturally a root underground. 3. Where there is a necessary connection between causes and effects, antecedents and consequence, signs and things signified. We know also that like causes will have like effects, and proportional causes will have proportional effects. Contrary causes will have contrary effects, and observing men may form many judgments by the rules of similitude and proportion, where the causes, effects, etc. are not entirely the same. 4. Where there is but a probable and uncertain connection between antecedents, concomitants, and consequence, we can give but a conjecture or a probable determination. If the clouds gather, or the weather-glass sinks, we suppose it will rain. If a man spit blood frequently with coughing, we suppose his lungs are hurt. If very dangerous symptoms appear, we expect his death. 5. Where causes operate freely, with a liberty of indifference to this or the contrary, there we cannot certainly know what the effects will be, for it seems to be contingent, and the certain knowledge of it belongs only to God. This is the case in the greatest part of human actions. 6. Yet wise men, by a just observation of human nature, will give very probable conjectures in this matter, also concerning things past or things future, because human nature in all ages and nations has such a conformity to itself. By a knowledge of the tempers of men and their present circumstances, we may be able to give a happy guess what their conduct will be, and what will be the event, by an observation of the like cases in former times. This made the Emperor Marcus Antoninus to say, quote, "By looking back into history and considering the fate and revolutions of governments, you will be able to form a guess and almost prophesy upon the future. For things past, present, and to come are strangely uniform, and of a colour, and are commonly cast in the same mould, so that upon the matter 40 years of human life may serve for a sample of 10,000. End quote. Collier's Antoninus, Book 7, Section 50. 7. There are also some other principles of judging concerning the past actions of men in former ages, besides books, histories, and traditions, which are the mediums of conveying human testimony, as we may infer the skill and magnificence of the ancients by some fragments of their statues and ruins of their buildings. We know what Roman legions came into Great Britain by numbers of bricks dug out of the earth in some parts of the island, with the marks of some particular legion upon them, which must have been employed there in brick-making. We rectify some mistakes in history by statues, coins, old altars, utensils of war, etc. We confirm or disprove some pretended traditions and historical writings by medals, images, pictures, urns, etc. Thus I have gone through all those particular objects of our judgment which I first proposed, and have laid down principles and rules by which we may safely conduct ourselves therein. There is a variety of other objects concerning which we are occasionally called to pass a judgment, namely the characters of persons, the value and worth of things, the sense and meaning of particular writers, matters of wit, oratory, poesy, matters of equity in judicial courts, matters of traffic and commerce between man and man, which would be endless to enumerate. But if the general and special rules of judgment which have been mentioned in these 2 last chapters are treasured up in the mind and wrought into the very temper of our souls in our younger years, they will lay a foundation for just and regular judgment concerning 1,000 special occurrences in the religious, civil, and learned life. End of section 16. Section 17 of Logic by Isaac Watts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Of the nature of a syllogism and the parts of which it is composed. Logic, the third part, of reasoning and syllogism. As the first work of the mind is perception, whereby our ideas are framed, and the second is judgment, which joins or disjoins our ideas and forms a proposition, so the third operation of the mind is reasoning, which joins several propositions together and makes a syllogism, that is, an argument whereby we are wont to infer something that is less known from truths which are more evident. In treating of this subject, let us consider more particularly 1. The nature of a syllogism and the parts of which it is composed. 2. The several kinds of syllogisms, with particular rules relating to them. 3. The doctrine of sophisms, or false reasoning, together with the means of avoiding them and the manner of solving or answering them. 4. Some general rules to direct our reasoning. Chapter 1. Of the nature of a syllogism and the parts of which it is composed. If the mere perception and comparison of 2 ideas would always show us whether they agree or disagree, then all rational propositions would be matters of intelligence or first principles, and there would be no use of reasoning or drawing any consequences. It is the narrowness of the human mind which introduces the necessity of reasoning. When we are unable to judge of the truth or falsehood of a proposition in an immediate manner by the mere contemplation of its subject and predicate, we are then constrained to use a medium and to compare each of them with some third idea, that by seeing how far they agree or disagree with it, we may be able to judge how far they agree or disagree among themselves. As if there are two lines, A and B, and I know not whether they are equal or no, I take a third line, C, or an inch, and apply it to each of them. If it agree with them both, then I infer that A and B are equal, but if it agree with one and not the other, then I conclude A and B are unequal. If it agree with neither of them, there can be no comparison. So, if the question be whether God must be worshipped, we seek a third idea, suppose the idea of a creator, and say, our Creator must be worshipped, God is our Creator, therefore God must be worshipped. The comparison of this third idea with the distinct parts of the question usually requires two propositions, which are called the premises. The third proposition which is drawn from them is the conclusion, wherein the question itself is answered, and the subject and predicate joined either in the negative or the affirmative. The foundation of all affirmative conclusions is laid in this general truth, that so far as two proposed ideas agree to any third idea, they agree also among themselves. The character of Creator agrees to God, and worship agrees to a Creator, therefore worship agrees to God. The foundation of all negative conclusions is this, that where one of the two proposed ideas agrees with the third idea, and the other disagrees with it, they must needs disagree so far also with one another. As, if no sinners are happy, and if angels are happy, then angels are not sinners. Thus it appears what is the strict and just notion of a syllogism. It is a sentence or argument made up of three propositions, so disposed as that the last is necessarily inferred from those which go before, as in the instances which have been just mentioned. In the constitution of a syllogism, two things may be considered, viz. The matter and the form of it. The matter of which a syllogism is made up is three propositions, and these three propositions are made up of three ideas or terms variously joined. The three terms are called the remote matter of a syllogism, and the three propositions the proxim or immediate matter of it. The three terms are named the major, the minor, and the middle. The predicate of the conclusion is called the major term because it is generally of a larger extension than the minor term or the subject. The major and minor terms are called the extremes. The middle term is the third idea, invented and disposed in two propositions in such a manner as to show the connection between the major and minor term in the conclusion, for which reason the middle term itself is sometimes called the argument. That proposition which contains the predicate of the conclusion connected with the middle term is usually called the major proposition, whereas the minor proposition connects the middle term with the subject of the conclusion and is sometimes called the assumption. Note: this exact distinction of the several parts of a syllogism and of the major and minor terms connected with the middle term in the major and minor propositions does chiefly belong to simple or categorical syllogisms, of which we shall speak in the next chapter, though all syllogisms whatsoever have something analogical to it. Note farther that the major proposition is generally placed first and the minor second, and the conclusion in the last place, where the syllogism is regularly composed and represented. The form of a syllogism is the framing and disposing of the premises according to art or just principles of reasoning, and the regular inference of the conclusion from them. The act of reasoning or inferring one thing from another is generally expressed and known by the particle therefore, when the argument is formed according to the rules of art, though in common discourse or writing such causal particles as for, because, manifest the act of reasoning, as well as the illative particles then and therefore. And wheresoever any of these words are used, there is a perfect syllogism expressed or implied, though perhaps the three propositions do not appear, or are not placed in regular form. End of section 17. Section 18 of Logic by Isaac Watts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Of the various kinds of syllogisms with particular rules relating to them. Part 1. Chapter 2 of the various kinds of syllogisms with particular rules relating to them. Syllogisms are divided into various kinds, either according to the question which is proved by them, according to the nature and composition of them, or according to the middle term which is used to prove the question. Section 1. Of universal and particular syllogisms, both negative and affirmative. According to the question which is to be proved, so syllogisms are divided into universal affirmative, universal negative, particular affirmative, and particular negative. This is often called a division of syllogisms, drawn from the conclusion, for so many sorts of conclusions there may be, which are marked with the letters A, E, I, O. In an universal affirmative syllogism, one idea is proved universally to agree with another, and may be universally affirmed of it, as every sin deserves death, every unlawful wish is a sin, therefore every unlawful wish deserves death. In an universal negative syllogism, one idea is proved to disagree with another idea universally, and may be thus denied of it, as no injustice can be pleasing to God, all persecution for the sake of conscience is injustice, therefore no persecution for conscience' sake can be pleasing to God. Particular affirmative and particular negative syllogisms may be easily understood by what is said of universals, and there will be sufficient examples given of all these in the next section. The general principle upon which these universal and particular syllogisms are founded is this: whatsoever is affirmed or denied universally of any idea may be affirmed or denied of all the particular kinds or beings which are contained in the extension of that universal idea. So the desert of death is affirmed universally of sin, and an unlawful wish is one particular kind of sin which is contained in the universal idea of sin, therefore the desert of death may be affirmed concerning an unlawful wish, and so of the rest. Note, in the doctrine of syllogisms, a singular and indefinite proposition are ranked among universals, as was before observed in the doctrine of propositions. Section 2. Of plain simple syllogisms and their rules. The next division of syllogisms is into simple and compound. This is drawn from the nature and composition of them. Single syllogisms are made up of 3 propositions. Compound syllogisms contain more than 3 propositions and may be formed into 2 or more syllogisms. Single syllogisms, for distinction's sake, may be divided into simple, complex, and conjunctive. Footnote: as ideas and propositions are divided into single and compound, and single are subdivided into simple and complex, so there are the same divisions and subdivisions applied to syllogisms. End footnote. Those are properly called simple or categorical syllogisms, which are made up of 3 plain, single, or categorical propositions, wherein the middle term is evidently and regularly joined with one part of the question in the major proposition, and with the other in the minor, whence there follows a plain single conclusion, as every human virtue is to be sought with diligence. Prudence is a human virtue, therefore prudence is to be sought diligently. Note: though the terms of propositions may be complex, yet where the composition of the whole argument is thus plain, simple, and regular, it is properly called a simple syllogism, since the complexion does not belong to the syllogistic form of it. Simple syllogisms have several rules belonging to them, which, being observed, will generally secure us from false inferences. But these rules being founded on 4 general axioms, it is necessary to mention these axioms beforehand for the use of those who will enter into the speculative reason of all these rules. Axiom 1. Particular propositions are contained in universals and may be inferred from them, but universals are not contained in particulars, nor can be inferred from them. Axiom 2. In all universal propositions, the subject is universal. In all particular propositions, the subject is particular. Axiom 3. In all affirmative propositions, the predicate has no greater extension than the subject, for its extension is restrained by the subject, and therefore it is always to be esteemed as a particular idea. It is by mere accident, if it ever be taken universally, and cannot happen but in such universal or singular propositions as are reciprocal. Axiom 4. The predicate of a negative proposition is always taken universally, for in its whole extension it is denied of the subject. If we say no stone is vegetable, we deny all sorts of vegetation concerning stones. The rules of simple, regular syllogisms are these. Rule 1. The middle term must not be taken twice particularly, but once at least universally, For if the middle term be taken for two different parts or kinds of the same universal, then the subject of the conclusion is compared with one of these parts, and the predicate with another, and this will never show whether that subject and predicate agree or disagree. There will then be four distinct terms in the syllogism, and the two parts of the question will not be compared with the same third idea. As if I say, some men are pious, and some men are robbers, I can never infer that some robbers are pious. For the middle term, men, being taken twice particularly, it is not the same men who are spoken of in the major and minor propositions. Rule 2. The terms in the conclusion must never be taken more universally than they are in the premises. The reason is derived from the first axiom that generals can never be inferred from particulars. Rule 3. A negative conclusion cannot be proved by two affirmative premises. For when the two terms of the conclusion are united or agree to the middle term, it does not follow by any means that they disagree with one another. Rule 4. If one of the premises be negative, the conclusion must be negative. For if the middle term be denied of either part of the conclusion, it may show that the terms of the conclusion disagree, but it can never show that they agree. Rule 5. If either of the premises be particular, the conclusion must be particular. This may be proved for the most part from the first axiom. These two last rules are sometimes united in this single sentence. The conclusion always follows the weaker part of the premises. Now negatives and particulars are counted inferior to affirmatives and universals. Rule 6. From two negative premises nothing can be concluded, for they separate the middle term both from the subject and predicate of the conclusion, and when two ideas disagree to a third, we cannot infer that they either agree or disagree with each other. Yet, where the negation is a part of the middle term, the two premises may look like negatives according to the words, but one of them is affirmative in sense, as, what has no thought cannot reason, but a worm has no thought, therefore a worm cannot reason. The minor proposition does really affirm the middle term concerning the subject, namely, a worm is what has no thought, and thus it is properly in this syllogism an affirmative proposition. Rule 7. From two particular premises nothing can be concluded. This rule depends chiefly on the first axiom. A more laborious and accurate proof of these rules and the derivation of every part of them in all possible cases from the foregoing axioms require so much time and are of so little importance to assist the right use of reason that it is needless to insist longer upon them here. See all this done ingeniously in the Logic called The Art of Thinking, Part 3, Chapter 3, etc. Section 3 of the Moods and Figures of Simple Syllogisms. Simple syllogisms are adorned and surrounded in the common books of logic with a variety of inventions about moods and figures, wherein, by the artificial contexture of the letters A, I, E, and O, men have endeavored to transform logic, or the art of reasoning, into a sort of mechanism, and to teach boys to syllogize or frame arguments and refute them without any real inward knowledge of the question. This is almost in the same manner as schoolboys have been taught, perhaps in their trifling years, to compose Latin verse, that is, by certain tables and squares with a variety of letters in them, wherein, by counting every sixth, seventh, or eighth letter, certain Latin words should be framed in the form of hexameters or pentameters, and this may be done by those who know nothing of Latin or of verses. I confess some of these logical subtleties have much more use than those versifying tables, and there is much ingenuity discovered in determining the precise number of syllogisms that may be formed in every figure and giving the reasons of them. Yet the light of nature, a good judgment, and due consideration of things tend more to true reasoning than all the trappings of moods and figures. But lest this book be charged with too great defects and imperfections, it may be proper to give short hints of that which some logicians have spent so much time and paper upon. All the possible compositions of three of the letters A, E, I, O to make three propositions amount to 64, but 54 of them are excluded from forming true syllogisms by the 7 rules in the foregoing section. The remaining 10 are variously diversified by figures and moods into 14 syllogisms. The figure of a syllogism is the proper disposition of the middle term with the parts of the question. A mood is the regular determination of propositions according to their quantity and quality. that is, their universal or particular affirmation or negation, which are signified by certain artificial words wherein the consonants are neglected, and these four vowels, A, E, I, O, are only regarded. There are generally counted 3 figures. In the first of them, the middle term is the subject of the major proposition, and the predicate of the minor. This contains 4 moods, namely Barbara, Celarent, Darii, Ferio, and it is the excellency of this figure that all sorts of questions or conclusions may be proved by it, whether A, E, I, or O, that is, universal or particular, affirmative or negative. As Ba, every wicked man is truly miserable; Ba, all tyrants are wicked men; Ra, therefore all tyrants are truly miserable. Se, he that is always in fear is not happy; La, covetous men are always in fear; Rent, therefore covetous men are not happy. Da, whatsoever furthers our salvation is good for us; Re, some afflictions further our salvation; I, therefore some afflictions are good for us. Fe, nothing that must be repented of is truly desirable; Re, some pleasures must be repented of; O, therefore there are some pleasures which are not truly desirable. In the second figure, the middle term is the predicate of both the premises. This contains 4 moods, namely Cesare, Camestres, Festino, Barocco, and it admits only of negative conclusions, as Se, no liar is fit to be believed; Sa, every good Christian is fit to be believed; Re, therefore no good Christian is a liar. The reader may easily form examples of the rest. The third figure requires that the middle term be the subject of both the premises. It has 6 moods, namely Darapti, Felapton, Disamis, Tatisi, Bocarto, Ferison, and it admits only of particular conclusions, as Da, whoever loves God shall be saved; Rap, all the lovers of God have their imperfections; Ti, therefore some who have imperfections shall be saved. I leave the reader to form examples of the rest. The moods of these 3 figures are comprised in 4 Latin verses: Barbara, Celarent, Darii, Ferio, quoque primae, Cesare, Camestres, Festino, Barocco, secundae; tertia, Darapti, sibi vindicat, atque Felapton, adiuncens, Disamis, Tatisi, Bucado, Ferison. The special rule of the 3 figures are these. In the first figure, the major proposition must always be universal, and the minor affirmative. In the second figure, also, the major must be universal, and one of the premises, together with the conclusion, must be negative. In the third figure, the minor must be affirmative, and the conclusion always particular. There is also a 4th figure, wherein the middle term is predicated in the major proposition and subjected in the minor. But this is a very indirect and oblique manner of concluding, and is never used in the sciences nor in human life, and therefore I call it useless. Some logicians will allow it to be nothing else but a mere inversion of the first figure, the moods of it, namely Paralipton or Barbari, Calentes, Dipatis, Fespamo, Fresisum, are not worthy to be explained by one example. Section 4 of Complex Syllogisms. It is not the mere use of complex terms in a syllogism that gives it this name, though one of the terms is usually complex, but those are properly called complex syllogisms, in which the middle term is not connected with the whole subject, or the whole predicate in 2 distinct propositions, but is intermingled and compared with them by parts, or in a more confused manner in different forms of speech. As the sun is a senseless being, the Persians worshipped the sun, therefore the Persians worshipped a senseless being. Here the predicate of the conclusion is worshipped a senseless being, part of which is joined with the middle term sun in the major proposition, and the other part in the minor. Though this sort of argument is confessed to be entangled or confused, and irregular if examined by the rules of simple syllogisms, yet there is a great variety of arguments used in books of learning and in common life, whose consequence is strong and evident, and which must be ranked under this head, as: First, exclusive propositions will form a complex argument. As pious men are the only favourites of heaven, true Christians are favourites of heaven, therefore true Christians are pious men. Or thus, hypocrites are not pious men, therefore hypocrites are no favourites of heaven. Second, exceptive propositions will make such complex syllogisms as none but physicians came to the consultation. The nurse is no physician, therefore the nurse came not to the consultation. Third, or comparative propositions as knowledge is better than riches, virtue is better than knowledge, therefore virtue is better than riches. Or thus, a dove will fly a mile in a minute, a swallow flies swifter than a dove, therefore a swallow will fly more than a mile in a minute. Fourth, or inceptive and desertive propositions as the fogs vanish as the sun rises, but the fogs have not yet begun to vanish, therefore the sun is not yet risen. Fifth, or modal propositions as it is necessary that a general understand the art of war, but chaos does not understand the art of war, therefore it is necessary chaos should not be a general. Or thus, a total eclipse of the sun would cause darkness at noon. It is possible that the moon at that time may totally eclipse the sun, therefore it is possible that the moon may cause darkness at noon. Besides all these, there is a great number of complex syllogisms, which can hardly be reduced under any particular titles, because the forms of human language are so exceeding various. As Christianity requires us to believe what the apostles wrote, St. Paul is an apostle, therefore Christianity requires us to believe what St. Paul wrote. No human artist can make an animal. A fly or a worm is an animal, therefore no human artist can make a fly or a worm. The father always lived in London, the son always lived with the father, therefore the son always lived in London. The blossom soon follows the full bud. This pear tree hath many full buds, therefore it will shortly have many blossoms. One hailstone never falls alone, but a hailstone fell just now, therefore others fell with it. Thunder seldom comes without lightning, but it thundered yesterday, therefore probably it lightened also. Moses wrote before the Trojan War, the first Greek historians wrote after the Trojan War, therefore the first Greek historians wrote after Moses. Footnote, perhaps some of these syllogisms may be reduced to those which I call connexive afterwards, but it is of little moment to what species they belong, for it is not any formal set of rules, so much as the evidence and force of reason, that must determine the truth or falsehood of all such syllogisms. End footnote. Now the force of all these arguments is so evident and conclusive that, though the form of the syllogism be never so regular, yet we are sure the inferences are just and true, for the premises, according to the reason of things, do really contain the conclusion that is deduced from them, which is a never-failing test of true syllogism, as shall be shown hereafter. The truth of most of these complex syllogisms may also be made to appear, if needful, by reducing them either to regular simple syllogisms or to some of the conjunctive syllogisms which are described in the next section. I will give an instance only in the first, and leave the rest to exercise the ingenuity of the reader. The first argument may be reduced to a syllogism in Barbara, thus: the sun is a senseless being. What the Persians worshipped is the sun, therefore what the Persians worshipped is a senseless being, though the conclusive force of the argument is evident without this reduction. Section 5 of Conjunctive Syllogisms. Those are called conjunctive syllogisms wherein one of the premises, namely the major, has distinct parts, which are joined by a conjunction or some such particle of speech. Most times the major or minor or both are explicitly compound propositions, and generally the major proposition is made up of two distinct parts or propositions, in such a manner as that by the assertion of one in the minor, the other is either asserted or denied in the conclusion, or by the denial of one in the minor, the other is either asserted or denied in the conclusion. It is hardly possible indeed to fit any short definition to include all the kinds of them, but the chief amongst them are the conditional syllogism, the disjunctive, the relative, and the connexive. First, the conditional or hypothetical syllogism is that whose major or minor or both are conditional propositions, as if there be a God, the world is governed by providence, but there is a God, therefore the world is governed by providence. These syllogisms admit two sorts of true argumentation, where the major is conditional. One, when the antecedent is asserted in the minor, that the consequent may be asserted in the conclusion, such is the preceding example. This is called arguing from the position of the antecedent to the position of the consequent. 2. When the consequent is contradicted in the minor proposition, that the antecedent may be contradicted in the conclusion, as, if atheists are in the right, then the world exists without a cause, but the world does not exist without a cause, therefore atheists are not in the right. This is called arguing from the removing of the consequent to the removing of the antecedent. To remove the antecedent or consequent here does not merely signify the denial of it, but the contradiction of it, for the mere denial of it by a contrary proposition will not make a true syllogism, as appears thus. If every creature be reasonable, every brute is reasonable, but no brute is reasonable, therefore no creature is reasonable. Whereas if you say in the minor, but every brute is not reasonable, then it would follow truly in the conclusion, therefore every creature is not reasonable. When the antecedent or consequent are negative propositions, they are removed by an affirmative, as, if there be no God, then the world does not discover creating wisdom, but the world, therefore there is a God. In this instance, the consequent is removed or contradicted in the minor, that the antecedent may be contradicted in the conclusion. So this argument of St. Paul, 1 Corinthians 15, if the dead rise not, Christ died in vain, but Christ did not die in vain, therefore the dead shall rise. There are also two sorts of false arguing, namely, 1. From the removing of the antecedent to the removing of the consequent, or 2. From the position of the consequent to the position of the antecedent. Examples of these are easily framed as 1. If a minister were a prince, he must be honored, but a minister is not a prince, therefore he must not be honored. 2. If a minister were a prince, he must be honored, but a minister must be honored, therefore he is a prince. Who sees not the ridiculous falsehood of both these syllogisms? Observation 1. If the subject of the antecedent and the consequent be the same, then the hypothetical syllogism may be turned into a categorical one, as, if Caesar be a king, he must be honored, but Caesar is a king, therefore, etc. This may be changed thus, every king must be honored, but Caesar is a king, therefore, etc. Observation 2. If the major proposition only be conditional, the conclusion is categorical, but if the minor, or both, be conditional, the conclusion is also conditional, as, the worshippers of images are idolaters. If the papists worship a crucifix, they are worshippers of an image. Therefore, if the papists worship a crucifix, they are idolaters. But this sort of syllogisms should be avoided as much as possible in disputation, because they greatly embarrass a cause. The syllogisms whose major only is hypothetical are very frequent and used with great advantage. Second, a disjunctive syllogism is when the major proposition is disjunctive, as the earth moves in a circle or an ellipsis, but it does not move in a circle, therefore it moves in an ellipsis. A disjunctive syllogism may have many members or parts. Thus, it is either spring, summer, autumn, or winter, but it is not spring, autumn, or winter, therefore it is summer. The true method of arguing here is from the assertion of one to the denial of the rest, or from the denial of one or more to the assertion of what remains, but the major should be so framed that the several parts of it cannot be true together, though one of them is evidently true. Third, a relative syllogism requires the major proposition to be relative, as, where Christ is, there shall his servants be, but Christ is in heaven, therefore his servants shall be there also. Or, as is the captain, so are his soldiers, but the captain is a coward, therefore his soldiers are so too. Arguments that relate to the doctrine of proportion must be referred to this head, as 2 are to 4, so are 3 to 6, but 2 make the half of 4, therefore 3 make the half of 6. Besides these, there is another sort of syllogism which is very natural and common, and yet authors take very little notice of it, call it by an improper name, and describe it very defectively, and that is, fourth, a connexive syllogism. This some have called copulative, but it does by no means require the major to be a copulative, nor a compound proposition, according to the definition given of it, Part 2, Chapter 2, Section 6, but it requires that two or more ideas be so connected either in the complex subject or predicate of the major, that if one of them be affirmed or denied in the minor, common sense will naturally show us what will be the consequence. It would be very tedious and useless to frame particular rules about them, as will appear by the following examples, which are very various, and yet may be farther multiplied. 1. Meekness and humility always go together. Moses was a man of meekness, therefore Moses was also humble. Or we may form this minor: Pharaoh was no humble man, therefore he was not meek. 2. No man can serve God and mammon. The covetous man serves mammon, therefore he cannot serve God. Or the minor may run thus: the true Christian serves God, therefore he does not serve mammon. 3. Genius must join with study to make a great man. Florino has genius, but he cannot study, therefore Florino will never be a great man. Or thus, Quintus studies hard, but has no genius, therefore Quintus will never be a great man. 4. Gulo cannot make a dinner without flesh and fish. There was no fish to be gotten today, therefore Gulo this day cannot make a dinner. 5. London and Paris are in different latitudes. The latitude of London is 51.5 degrees, therefore this cannot be the latitude of Paris. 6. Joseph and Benjamin had one mother. Rachel was the mother of Joseph, therefore she was Benjamin's mother also. 7. The father and the son are of equal stature. The father is 6 feet high, therefore the son is 6 feet high also. 8. Pride is inconsistent with innocence. Angels have innocence, therefore they have no pride. Or thus, devils have pride, therefore they have not innocence. I might multiply other instances of these connexive syllogisms by bringing in all sorts of exceptive, exclusive, comparative, and modal propositions into the composition of them, for all these may be wrought into conjunctive as well as into simple syllogisms, and thereby we may render them complex, but it would waste time and paper without equal profit. Concerning these various kinds of conjunctive syllogisms, take these 2 observations. Observation 1, most of them may be transformed into categorical syllogisms by those who have a mind to prove the truth of them that way, or they may be easily converted into each other by changing the forms of speech. Observation 2, these conjunctive syllogisms are seldom deficient or faulty in the form of them, for such a deficiency would be discovered at first glance generally by common reason, without any artificial rules of logic. The chief care, therefore, is to see that the major proposition be true, upon which the whole force of the argument usually depends. End of section 18. Section 19 of Logic by Isaac Watts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Of the various kinds of syllogisms with particular rules relating to them. Part 2. Section 6 of Compound Syllogisms. We properly call those compound syllogisms which are made of 2 or more single syllogisms and may be resolved into them. The chief kinds are these: epikyrema, dilemma, prosyllogismus, and sorites. 1. Epikyrema is a syllogism which contains the proof of the major or minor or both before it draws the conclusion. This is often used in writing, in public speeches, and in common conversation, that so each part of the discourse may be confirmed and put out of doubt as it moves on towards the conclusion which was chiefly designed. Take this instance. Sickness may be good for us, for it weans us from the pleasures of life and makes us think of dying, but we are uneasy under sickness, which appears by our impatience, complaints, groanings, etc. Therefore we are uneasy sometimes under that which is good for us. Another instance you may see in Cicero's oration in defense of Milo, who had slain Clodius. His major proposition is that it is lawful for one man to kill another who lies in wait to kill him, which he proves from the custom of nations, from natural equity, examples, etc. His minor is that Clodius laid wait for Milo, which he proves by his arms, guards, etc., and then infers the conclusion that it was lawful for Milo to kill Clodius. Second, a dilemma is an argument which divides the whole into all its parts or members by a disjunctive proposition, and then infers something concerning each part, which is finally inferred concerning the whole. Instances of this are frequent, as, in this life we must either obey our vicious inclinations or resist them. To obey them will bring sin and sorrow. To resist them is laborious and painful, therefore we cannot be perfectly free from sorrow or pain in this life. A dilemma becomes faulty or ineffectual 3 ways. First, when the members of the division are not well opposed, or not fully enumerated, for then the major is false. Secondly, when what is asserted concerning each part is not just, for then the minor is not true. Thirdly, when it may be retorted with equal force upon him who utters it. There was a famous ancient instance of this case, wherein a dilemma was retorted. Euathlus promised Protagoras a reward when he had taught him the art of pleading, and it was to be paid the first day that he gained any cause in the court. After a considerable time, Protagoras goes to law with Euathlus for the reward, and uses this dilemma. Either the cause will go on my side or on yours. If the cause goes on my side, you must pay me according to the sentence of the judge. If the cause goes on your side, you must pay me according to your bargain. Therefore, whether the cause goes for me or against me, you must pay me the reward. But Euathlus retorted this dilemma thus: Either I shall gain the cause or lose it. If I gain the cause, then nothing will be due to you, according to the sentence of the judge. But if I lose the cause, nothing will be due to you, according to my bargain. Therefore, whether I lose or gain the cause, I will not pay you, for nothing will be due to you. Note 1. A dilemma is usually described as though it always proved the absurdity, inconvenience, or unreasonableness of some opinion or practice, and this is the most common design of it, but it is plain that it may also be used to prove the truth or advantage of anything proposed, as, in heaven we shall either have desires or not. If we have no desires, then we have full satisfaction. If we have desires, they shall be satisfied as fast as they arise. Therefore in heaven we shall be completely satisfied. Note 2. This sort of argument may be composed of 3 or more members, and may be called a trilemma. Third, a prosyllogism is when 2 or more syllogisms are so connected together that the conclusion of the former is the major or minor of the following, as blood cannot think, but the soul of a man thinks. Therefore the soul of a man is not blood, but the soul of a brute is his blood, according to the Scripture. Therefore the soul of man is different from the soul of a brute. See another instance in the introduction to this treatise. Fourth, a sorites is when several middle terms are chosen to connect one another successively in several propositions, till the last proposition connects its predicate with the first subject. Thus, all men of revenge have their souls often uneasy. Uneasy souls are a plague to themselves. Now, to be one's own plague is folly in the extreme. Therefore, all men of revenge are extreme fools. The Apostle, Romans 8 verse 29, gives us an instance of this sort of argument, if it were reduced to exact form. Whom he foreknew, those he predestinated. Whom he predestinated he called. Whom he called he justified. Whom he justified he glorified. Therefore, whom he foreknew he glorified. To these syllogisms it may not be improper to add induction, which is, when from several particular propositions we infer one general, as the doctrine of the Socinians cannot be proved from the Gospels, it cannot be proved from the Acts of the Apostles, it cannot be proved from the Epistles, nor the Book of Revelation, therefore it cannot be proved from the New Testament. Note, this sort of argument is often defective because there is not due care taken to enumerate all the particulars on which the conclusion should depend. All these 4 kinds of syllogisms in this section may be called redundant because they have more than 3 propositions, but there is one sort of syllogism which is defective and is called an enthymeme, because only the conclusion with one of the premises is expressed, while the other is supposed and reserved in the mind. Thus there is no true religion without good morals, therefore a knave cannot be truly religious. Or thus, it is our duty to love our neighbours as ourselves, therefore there are but few who perform their duty. Note, this is the most common sort of argument amongst mankind, both in writing and in speaking, for it would take up too much time and too much retard the discourse to draw out all our arguments in mood and figure. Besides, mankind love to have so much compliment paid to their understandings, as to suppose that they know the major or minor, which is suppressed and implied when you pronounce the other premise and the conclusion. If there be any debate about this argument, the syllogism must be completed in order to try its force and goodness by adding the absent propositions. Section 7 of the middle terms of commonplaces or topics and invention of arguments. The next division of syllogisms is according to the middle term, which is made use of in the proof of any proposition. Now, the middle term, as we have hinted before, is often called argument because the force of the syllogism depends upon it. We must make a little delay here to treat briefly of the doctrine of topics or places, whence middle terms or arguments are drawn. All arts and sciences have some general subjects which belong to them, which are called topics or commonplaces, because middle terms are borrowed and arguments derived from them for the proof of the various propositions which we have occasion to discourse of. The topics of grammar are etymology, noun, verb, construction, signification, etc. The topics of logic are genus, species, difference, property, definition, division, etc. The topics of ontology or metaphysics are cause, effect, action, passion, identity, opposition, subject, adjunct, sign, etc. The topics of morality or ethics are law, sin, duty, authority, freedom of will, command, threatening, reward, punishment, etc. The topics of theology are God, Christ, faith, hope, worship, salvation, etc. To these several topics there belong particular observations, axioms or canons, or rules, which are laid down in their proper sciences, as grammar hath such canons, namely, words in a different construction obtain a different sense. Words derived from the same primitive may probably have some affinity in their original meaning, etc. Canons in logic are such as these. Every part of a division, singly taken, must contain less than the whole. A definition must be peculiar and proper to the thing defined. Whatever is affirmed or denied of the genus may be affirmed or denied of the species, etc. Metaphysical canons are such as these. Final causes belong only to intelligent agents. If a natural and necessary cause operate, the effect will follow, etc. And there are large catalogues of many more in each distinct science. Now it has been the custom of those who teach logic or rhetoric to direct their disciples, when they want an argument, to consider the several topics which are suited to their subjects of discourse, and to rummage over the definitions, divisions, and canons that belong to each topic. This is called the invention of an argument, and it is taught with much solemnity in some schools. I grant there may be good use for this practice for persons of a lower genius, when they are to compose any discourse for the public, or for those superior parts, to refresh their memory and revive their acquaintance with a subject which has been long absent from their thoughts, or when their natural spirits labour under indisposition and languor. But when a man of moderate sagacity has made himself master of his theme, by just diligence and inquiry, he has seldom need to run knocking at the doors of all the topics, that he may furnish himself with argument or matter of speaking. And indeed it is only a man of sense and judgment that can use commonplaces or topics well, for amongst this variety he only knows what is fit to be left out, as well as what is fit to be spoken. By some logical writers this business of topics and invention is treated of in such a manner, with mathematical figures and diagrams, filled with the barbarous technical words napkas, nipkis, ropkos, nosrop, etc., as though an ignorant lad were to be led mechanically in certain artificial harnesses and trammels to find out arguments to prove or refute any proposition whatsoever, without any rational knowledge of the ideas. Now there is no need to throw words of contempt on such a practice. The very description of it carries reproof and ridicule in absence. Section 8. Of several kinds of arguments and demonstrations. We proceed now to the division of syllogisms according to the middle term, and in this part of our treatise the syllogisms themselves are properly called arguments, and are thus distributed. First, arguments are called grammatical, logical, metaphysical, physical, moral, mechanical, theological, etc., according to the art, science, or subject whence the middle term or topic is borrowed. Thus, if we prove that no man shall steal from his neighbour, because the Scripture forbids it, this is a theological argument. If we prove it from the laws of the land, it is political. But if we prove it from the principles of reason and equity, the argument is moral. Second, arguments are either certain and evident, or doubtful and merely probable. Probable arguments are those whose conclusions are proved by some probable medium, as this hill was once a churchyard or a field of battle, because there are many human bones found here. This is not a certain argument, for human bones might have been conveyed there some other way. Evident and certain arguments are called demonstrations, for they prove their conclusions by clear mediums and undoubted principles, and they are generally divided into these two sorts. 1. Demonstrations a priori, which prove the effect by its necessary cause, as I prove the Scripture is infallibly true because it is the word of God who cannot lie. 2. Demonstrations a posteriori, which infer the cause from its necessary effect, as I infer there hath been the hand of some artificer here, because I find a curious engine, or I infer there is a God from the works of his wisdom in the visible world. The last of these is called demonstratio tu oti, because it proves only the existence of a thing. The first is named demonstratio tu deoti, because it shows also the cause of existence. But note that though these two sorts of arguments are most peculiarly called demonstrations, yet generally any strong and convincing argument obtains that name, and it is the custom of mathematicians to call all their arguments demonstrations, from what medium soever they derive them. Third, arguments are divided into artificial and inartificial, An artificial argument is taken from the nature and circumstances of the things, and if the argument be strong, it produces a natural certainty, as the world was first created by God because nothing can create itself. An inartificial argument is the testimony of another, and this is called original, when our information proceeds immediately from the persons concerned, or from eyes or ear witnesses of a fact. It is called tradition, when it is delivered by the report of others. We have taken notice before that testimony is either divine or human. If the human testimony be strong, it produces a moral certainty, but divine testimony produces a supernatural certainty, which is far superior. Note: arguments taken from human testimony as well as from laws and rules of equity are called moral, and indeed the same name is also applied to every sort of argument which is drawn from the free actions of God, or the contingent actions of men, wherein we cannot arise to a natural certainty, but content ourselves with a high degree of probability, which in many cases is scarce inferior to natural certainty. Fourth, arguments are either direct or indirect. It is a direct argument, where the middle term is such as proves the question itself, and infers that very proposition which was the matter of inquiry. An indirect or oblique argument proves or refutes some other proposition, and thereby makes the thing inquired appear to be true by plain consequence. Several arguments are called indirect, as 1. When some contradictory proposition is proved to be false, improbable, or impossible, or when, upon supposition of the falsehood or denial of the original proposition, some absurdity is inferred. This is called a proof per impossibile, or a reductio ad absurdum. 2. When some other proposition is proved to be true which is less probable, and thence it follows that the original proposition is true because it is more probable. This is an argument ex minus probabili ad magis. 3. When any other proposition is proved, upon which it was before agreed to yield the original question. This is an argument ex consesso. 5th. There is yet another rank of arguments which have Latin names. Their true distinction is derived from the topics or middle terms which are used in them, though they are called an address to our judgment, our faith, our ignorance, our profession, our modesty, and our passions. 1. If an argument be taken from the nature or existence of things, and addressed to the reason of mankind, it is called argumentum ad judicium. 2. When it is borrowed from some convincing testimony, it is argumentum ad fidem, and addressed to our faith. 3. When it is drawn from any insufficient medium whatsoever, and yet the opposer has not skill to refute or answer it, it is called argumentum ad ignorantiam, and addressed to our ignorance. When it is built upon the professed principles or opinions of the person with whom we argue, whether the opinions be true or false, it is named argumentum ad hominem, and addressed to our professed principles. St. Paul often uses this argument when he reasons with the Jews, and when he says, "I speak as a man." 5. When the argument is fetched from the sentiments of some wise, great, or good men, whose authority we reverence and hardly dare oppose, it is called argumentum ad verecundiam, and addressed to our modesty. 6. I add finally, when an argument is borrowed from any topics which are suited to engage the inclinations and passions of the hearers on the side of the speaker, rather than to convince the judgment, this is argumentum ad passiones, and addressed to the passions, or, if it be made publicly, it is called ad populum, or an address to the people. After all these divisions of syllogism, or argument arising from the middle term, there is one distinction proper to be mentioned, which arises from the premises. An argument is called uniform when both the premises are derived from the same spring of knowledge, whether it be sense, reason, consciousness, human faith, or divine faith. But when the two premises are derived from different springs of knowledge, it is called a mixed argument. Whether the conclusion must be called human or divine, when one or both premises are matters of divine faith, but the conclusion is drawn by human reason, I leave to be disputed and determined by the schools of theology. Thus the second chapter is finished, and a particular account given of all the chief kinds of syllogisms or arguments which are made use of among men, or treated of in logic, together with special rules for the formation of them, as far as is necessary. If a syllogism agree with the rules which are given for the construction and regulation of it, it is called a true argument. If it disagree with these rules, it is a paralogism or false argument, but when a false argument puts on the face and appearance of a true one, then it is properly called a sophism or fallacy, which shall be the subject of the next chapter. End of section 19. Section 20 of Logick by Isaac Watts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Doctrine of Sophisms. Chapter 3. The Doctrine of Sophisms. From truth nothing can really follow but what is true. Whensoever therefore we find a false conclusion drawn from premises which seem to be true, there must be some fault in the deduction or inference, or else one of the premises is not true in the sense in which it is used in that argument. When an argument carries the face of truth with it, and yet leads us into mistake, it is a sophism, and there is some need of a particular description of these fallacious arguments, that we may with more ease and readiness detect and solve them. Section 1. Of several kinds of sophisms, and their solution. As the rules of right judgment and of good rationation often coincide with each other, so the doctrine of prejudices, which was treated of in the second part of Logic, has anticipated a great deal of what might be said on the subject of sophisms, yet I shall mention the most remarkable springs of false argumentation which are reduced by logicians to some of the following heads. First, the first sort of sophism is called ignorantio elenchi, or a mistake of the question, that is, when something else is proved which has neither any necessary connection nor inconsistency with the thing inquired, and consequently gives no determination to the inquiry, though it may seem at first sight to determine the question, as if any should conclude that St. Paul was not a native Jew by proving that he was born a Roman, or if they should pretend to determine that he was neither Roman nor Jew by proving that he was born at Tarsus in Cilicia. These sophisms are refuted by showing that all these three may be true, for he was born of Jewish parents in the city of Tarsus, and by some peculiar privilege granted to his parents or his native city, he was born a denizen of Rome. Thus there is neither of these three characters of the apostle inconsistent with each other, and therefore the proving one of them true does not refute the others. Or, if the question be proposed whether excess of wine can be hurtful to him that drinks it, and the sophister should prove that it revives his spirits, it exhilarates his soul, it gives a man courage, and makes him strong and active, and then he takes it for granted that he has proved his point. But the respondent may easily show that though wine may do all this, yet it may be finally hurtful both to the soul and body of him that drinks it to excess. Disputers, when they grow warm, are ready to run into this fallacy. They dress up the opinion of their adversary as they please, and ascribe sentiments to him which he doth not acknowledge, and when they have, with a great deal of pomp, attacked and confounded these images of straw of their own making, they triumph over their adversary as though they had utterly confuted his opinion. It is a fallacy of the same kind which a disputant is guilty of when he finds that his adversary is too hard for him, and that he cannot fairly prove the question first proposed. He then, with slyness and subtlety, turns the discourse aside to some other kindred point which he can prove, and exults in that new argument wherein his opponent never contradicted him. The way to prevent this fallacy is by keeping the eye fixed on the precise point of dispute, and neither wandering from it ourselves, nor suffering our antagonist to wander from it, or substitute anything else in its room. Second, the next sophism is called petitio principi, or a supposition of what is not granted, that is, when any proposition is proved by the same proposition in other words, or by something that is equally uncertain and disputed. As if anyone undertake to prove that the human soul is extended through all the parts of the body, because it resides in every member, which is but the same thing in other words. Or if a papist should pretend to prove that his religion is the only Catholic religion, and is derived from Christ and his apostles, because it agrees with the doctrine of all the fathers of the Church, all the holy martyrs, and all the Christian world throughout all ages, whereas this is the great point in contest, whether their religion does agree with that of all the ancients and the primitive Christians or no. Third, that sort of fallacy which is called a circle is very near akin to the petitio principi, as when one of the premises in a syllogism is questioned and opposed, and we intend to prove it by the conclusion, or when in a train of syllogisms we prove the last by recurring to what was the conclusion of the first. The papists are famous at this sort of fallacy, when they prove the Scripture to be the word of God by the authority or infallible testimony of their church, and when they are called to show the infallible authority of their church, they pretend to prove it by the Scripture. Fourth, the next kind of sophism is called non causa pro causa, or the assignation of a false cause. This the peripatetic philosophers were guilty of continually when they told us that certain beings, which they called substantial forms, were the springs of colour, motion, vegetation, and the various operations of natural beings in the animate and inanimate world, when they informed us that nature was terribly afraid of vacuum, and that this was the cause why water would not fall out of a long tube if it was turned upside down. The moderns, as well as the ancients, fall often into this fallacy when they positively assign the reasons of natural appearances without sufficient experiments to prove them. Astrologers are overrun with this sort of fallacies, and they cheat the people grossly by pretending to tell fortunes and to deduce the cause of the various occurrences in the lives of men from the various positions of the stars and planets, which they call aspects. When comets and eclipses of the sun and moon are construed to signify the fate of princes, the revolution of states, famine, wars, and calamities of all kinds, it is a fallacy that belongs to this rank of sophisms. There is scarce anything more common in human life than this sort of deceitful argument. If any two accidental events happen to concur, one is presently made the cause of the other. If Titius wronged his neighbour of a guinea, and in 6 months after he fall down and broke his leg, weak men will impute it to the divine vengeance on Titius for his former injustice. This sophism was found also in the early days of the world, for when holy Job was surrounded with uncommon miseries, his own friends inferred that he was a most heinous criminal, and charged him with aggravated guilt as the cause of his calamities, though God himself, by a voice from heaven, solved this uncharitable sophism, and cleared his servant Job of that charge. How frequent is it among men to impute crimes to wrong persons? We too often charge that upon the wicked contrivance and premeditated malice of a neighbour, which arose merely from ignorance or from unguarded temper. And on the other hand, when we have a mind to excuse ourselves, we practice the same sophism, and charge that upon our inadvertence or our ignorance, which perhaps was designed wickedness. What is really done by a necessity of circumstances, we sometimes impute to choice, and again we charge that upon necessity which was really desired and chosen. Sometimes a person acts out of judgment, in opposition to his inclination. Another person perhaps acts the same thing out of inclination and against his judgment. It is hard for us to determine with assurance what are the inward springs and secret causes of every man's conduct, and therefore we should be cautious and slow in passing a judgment where the case is not exceeding evident, and if we should mistake, let it rather be on the charitable than on the censorious side. It is the same sophism that charges mathematical learning with leading the minds of men to skepticism and infidelity, and as unjustly accuses the new philosophy of paving the way to heresy and schism. Thus the Reformation from Popery has been charged with the murder and blood of millions, when in truth is to be imputed to the tyranny of the princes and the priests, who would not suffer the people to reform their sentiments and their practices according to the word of God. Thus Christianity in the primitive ages was charged by the heathens with all the calamities which befell the Roman Empire, because the Christians renounced the heathen gods and idols. The way to relieve ourselves from these sophisms, and to secure ourselves from the danger of falling into them, is an honest and diligent inquiry into the real nature and cause of things, with a constant watchfulness against all those prejudices that might warp the judgment aside from truth in that inquiry. The next is called Fallacia Accidentis, or a sophism wherein we pronounce concerning the nature and essential properties of any subject according to something which is merely accidental to it. This is akin to the former, and is also very frequent in human life. So if opium, or the Peruvian bark, has been used imprudently or unsuccessfully, whereby the patient has received injury, some weaker people absolutely pronounce against the use of the bark or opium upon all occasions whatsoever, and are ready to call them poison. So wine has been the accidental occasion of drunkenness and quarrels. Learning and printing may have been the accidental cause of sedition in a state. The reading of the Bible, by accident, has been abused to promote heresies or destructive errors, and for these reasons they have all been pronounced evil things. Mahomet forbade his followers the use of wine, the Turks discourage learning in their dominion, and the Papists forbid the Scripture to be read by the laity. But how very unreasonable are these inferences, and these prohibitions which are built upon them. Sixth, the next sophism borders upon the former, and that is when we argue from that which is true in particular circumstances to prove the same thing true absolutely, simply, and abstracted from all circumstances. This is called in the schools a sophism ad dicta secundum quid ad dictum simpliciter, as that which is bought in the shambles is eaten for dinner. raw meat is bought in the shambles, therefore raw meat is eaten for dinner. Or thus Livy writes fables and improbabilities when he describes prodigies and omens, therefore Livy's Roman history is never to be believed in anything. Or thus, there may be some mistake of transcribers in some part of Scripture, therefore Scripture alone is not a safe guide for our faith. This sort of sophism has its reverse also, as when we argue from that which is true simply and absolutely to prove the same thing true in all particular circumstances whatsoever. Footnote: this is arguing from a moral universality which admits of some exceptions, in the same manner as may be argued from metaphysical or a natural universality which admits of no exceptions. End footnote. As if a traitor should argue from the 6th commandment, "Thou shalt not kill a man," to prove that he himself ought not to be hanged, or if a madman should tell me, "I ought not to withhold his sword from him, because no man ought to withhold the property from another." These two last species of sophisms are easily solved by showing the difference betwixt things in their absolute nature and the same things surrounded with peculiar circumstances and considered in regard to special times, places, persons, and occasions, or by showing the difference between a moral and a metaphysical universality, and that the proposition will hold good in one case but not in the other. 7th, the sophisms of composition and division come next to be mentioned. The sophism of composition is when we infer anything concerning ideas in a compounded sense, which is only true in a divided sense. And when it is said in the Gospel that Christ made the blind to see, and the deaf to hear, and the lame to walk, we ought not to infer hence that Christ performed contradictions, but those who were blind before were made to see, and those who were deaf before were made to hear, etc. So when the Scripture assures us the worst of sinners may be saved, it signifies only that they who have been the worst of sinners may repent and be saved, not that they shall be saved in their sins. Or, if anyone should argue thus, 2 and 3 are even and odd, 5 are 2 and 3, therefore 5 are even and odd. Here, that is very falsely inferred concerning 2 and 3 in union, which is only true of them divided. The sophism of division is when we infer the same thing concerning ideas in a divided sense, which is only true in a compounded sense. As if we should pretend to prove that every soldier in the Grecian army put 100,000 Persians to flight because the Grecian soldiers did so. Or if a man should argue thus, 5 is one number, 2 and 3 are 5, therefore 2 and 3 are one number. This sort of sophisms is committed when the word all is taken in a collective and a distributive sense without a due distinction, as if anyone should reason thus: all the musical instruments of the Jewish temple made a noble concert. The harp was a musical instrument of the Jewish temple, therefore the harp made a noble concert. Here the word all in the major is collective, whereas such a conclusion requires that the word all should be distributive. It is the same fallacy when the universal word, all or no, refers to species in one proposition and to individuals in another, as all animals were in Noah's ark, therefore no animals perished in the flood, whereas in the premise all animals signifies every kind of animals, which does not exclude or deny the drowning of 1,000 individuals. 8th, the last sort of sophisms arises from our abuse of the ambiguity of words, which is the largest and most extensive kind of fallacy, and indeed several of the former fallacies might be reduced to this head. When the words or phrases are plainly equivocal, they are called sophisms of equivocation. As if we should argue thus: he that sends forth a book into the light desires it to be read, he that throws a book into the fire sends it into the light, therefore he that throws a book into the fire desires it to be read. This sophism, as well as the foregoing and all of the like nature, are solved by showing the different senses of the word, terms, or phrases. Here light, in the major proposition, signifies the public view of the world. In the minor it signifies the brightness of flame and fire, and therefore the syllogism has 4 terms, or rather it has no middle term and proves nothing. But where such gross equivocations and ambiguities appear in arguments, there is little danger of imposing upon ourselves or others. The greatest danger, and which we are perpetually exposed to in reasoning, is where the 2 senses or significations of one term are near akin and not plainly distinguished, and yet they are really sufficiently different in their sense to lead us into great mistakes if we are not watchful. And indeed the greatest part of controversies in the sacred or civil life arise from the different senses that are put upon words, and the different ideas which are included in them, as have been shown at large in the first part of Logic, chapter 4, which treats of words and terms. There is, after all these, another sort of sophism, which is wont to be called an imperfect enumeration or a false induction, when from a few experiments or observations men infer general theorems and universal propositions. But this is sufficiently noticed in the foregoing chapter, where we treated of that sort of syllogism which is called induction. Section 2. Two general tests of true syllogisms and methods of solving all sophisms. Besides the special description of true syllogisms and sophisms already given, and the rules by which the one are framed and the other refuted, there are these two general methods of reducing all syllogisms whatsoever to a test of their truth or falsehood. First, the first is that the premises must, at least implicitly, contain the conclusion, or thus one of the premises must contain the conclusion, and the other must show that the conclusion is contained in it. The reason of this rule is this: when any proposition is offered to be proved, it is necessary to find another proposition which confirms it, which may be called the containing proposition, but because the second must not contain the first in an express manner and in the same words. Footnote: it is confessed that conditional and disjunctive major propositions do expressly contain all that is in the conclusion, but then it is not in a certain and conclusive manner, but only in a dubious form of speech and mingled with other terms, and therefore it is not the same express proposition. End footnote. Therefore it is necessary that a third or ostensive proposition be found out to show that the second proposition contains the first, which was to be proved. Let us make an experiment of this syllogism: whosoever is a slave to his natural inclinations is miserable. The wicked man is a slave to his natural inclinations, therefore the wicked man is miserable. Here it is evident that the major proposition contains the conclusion, for under the general character of a slave to natural inclinations, a wicked man is contained or included, and the minor proposition declares it. Whence the conclusion is evidently deduced that the wicked man is miserable. In many affirmative syllogisms we may suppose either the major or the minor to contain the conclusion, and the other to show it, for there is no great difference. But in negative syllogisms it is the negative proposition that contains the conclusion, and the affirmative proposition shows it. As every wise man masters his passions, no angry man masters his passions, therefore no angry man is wise. Here it is more natural to suppose the minor to be the containing proposition. It is the minor implicitly denies wisdom concerning an angry man, because mastering the passions is included in wisdom, and the major shows it. Note: this rule may be applied to complex and conjunctive as well as simple syllogisms, and is adapted to show the truth or falsehood of any of them. Second. The second is this: as the terms in every syllogism are usually repeated twice, so they must be taken precisely in the same sense in both places, for the greatest part of mistakes that arise in forming syllogisms is derived from some little difference in the sense of one of the terms in the two parts of the syllogism wherein it is used. Let us consider the following sophisms. 1. It is a sin to kill a man. A murderer is a man, therefore it is a sin to kill a murderer. Here the word kill in the first proposition signifies to kill unjustly, or without law. In the conclusion it is taken absolutely for putting a man to death in general, and therefore the inference is not good. 2. What I am, you are not, but I am a man, therefore you are not a man. This is a relative syllogism, but if it be reduced to a regular categorical form, it will appear there is ambiguity in the terms thus: what I am is a man, you are not what I am, therefore you are not a man. Here, what I am in the major proposition is taken specially for my nature, but in the minor proposition the same words are taken individually for my person. Therefore the inference must be false, for the syllogism does not take the term, what I am, both times in the same sense. 3. He that says you are an animal says true, but he that says you are a goose says you are an animal, therefore he that says you are a goose is true. In the major proposition the word animal is the predicate of an incidental proposition, which incidental proposition being affirmative renders the predicate of it particular, according to chapter 2, section 2, axiom 3, and consequently the word animal there signifies only human animality. In the minor proposition, the word animal for the same reason signifies the animality of a goose, whereby it becomes an ambiguous term and unfit to build the conclusion upon. Or if you say the word animal in the minor is taken for human animality, then the minor is evidently false. It is from this last general test of syllogisms that we derive the custom of the respondent in answering the arguments of the opponent, which is to distinguish upon the major or minor proposition, and declare which term is used in two senses, and in what sense the proposition may be true, and in what sense it is false. End of section 20. Section 21 of Logic by Isaac Watts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Some general rules to direct our reasoning. Chapter 4. Some general rules to direct our reasoning. Most of the general and special directions given to form our judgments aright in the preceding part of Logic might be rehearsed here, for the judgments which we pass upon things are generally built on some secret reasoning or argument, by which the proposition is supposed to be proved. But there may be yet some farther assistances given to our reasoning powers in their search after truth, and an observation of the following rules will be of great importance for that end. Rule 1. Accustom yourselves to clear and distinct ideas, to evident propositions, to strong and convincing arguments. Converse much with those friends and those books and those parts of learning where you meet with the greatest clearness of thought and force of reasoning. The mathematical sciences, and particularly arithmetic, geometry, and mechanics, abound with these advantages, and if there were nothing valuable in them for the use of human life, yet the very speculative parts of this sort of learning are well worth our study, for by perpetual examples they teach us to conceive with clearness, to connect our ideas and propositions in a train of dependence, to reason with strength and demonstration, and to distinguish between truth and falsehood. Something of these sciences should be studied by every man who pretends to learning, and that, as Mr. Locke expresses it, not so much to make us mathematicians as to make us reasonable creatures. We should gain such a familiarity with evidence of perception and force of reasoning, and get such a habit of discerning clear truths, that the mind may be soon offended with obscurity and confusion. Then we shall, as it were, naturally and with ease restrain our minds from rash judgment before we attain just evidence of the proposition which is offered to us, and we shall with the same ease and, as it were, naturally seize and embrace every truth that is proposed with just evidence. This habit of conceiving clearly, of judging justly, and of reasoning well, is not to be attained merely by the happiness of constitution, the brightness of genius, the best natural parts, or the best collection of logical precepts. It is custom and practice that must form and establish this habit. We must apply ourselves to it till we perform all this readily, and without reflecting on rules. A coherent thinker and a strict reasoner is not to be made at once by a set of rules, any more than a good painter or musician may be formed extempore by an excellent lecture on music or painting. It is of infinite importance, therefore, in our younger years, to be taught both the value and the practice of conceiving clearly and reasoning rightly. For when we are grown up to the middle of life or past it, it is no wonder that we should not learn good reasoning, any more than that an ignorant clown should not be able to learn fine language, dancing, or a courtly behaviour, when his rustic airs have grown up with him till the age of 40. For want of this care, some persons of rank and education dwell all their days among obscure ideas. They conceive and judge always in confusion. They take weak arguments for demonstration. They are led away with the disguises and shadows of truth. Now, if such persons happen to have a bright imagination, a volubility of speech, and a copiousness of language, they not only impose many errors upon their own understandings, but they stamp the image of their own mistakes upon their neighbours also, and spread their errors abroad. It is a matter of just lamentation and pity to consider the weakness of the common multitude of mankind in this respect, how they receive anything into their assent upon the most trifling grounds. True reasoning hath very little share in forming their opinions. They resist the most convincing arguments by an obstinate adherence to their prejudices, and believe the most improbable things with the greatest assurance. They talk of the abstrusest mysteries, and determine upon them with the utmost confidence, and without just evidence either from reason or revelation. A confused heap of dark and inconsistent ideas make up a good part of their knowledge in matters of philosophy as well as religion, having never been taught the use and value of clear and just reasoning. Yet it must be still confessed that there are some mysteries in religion, both natural and revealed, as well as some abstruse points in philosophy, wherein the wise as well as the unwise must be content with obscure ideas. There are several things, especially relating to the invisible world, which are unsearchable in our present state, and therefore we must believe what revelation plainly dictates, though the ideas may be obscure. Reason itself demands this of us, but we should seek for the brightest evidence both of ideas and of the connection of them, wheresoever it is attainable. Rule 2. Enlarge your general acquaintance with things daily, in order to attain a rich furniture of topics or middle terms, whereby those propositions which occur may be either proved or disproved, but especially meditate and inquire with great diligence and exactness into the nature, properties, circumstances, and relations of the particular subjects about which you judge or argue. Consider its causes, effects, consequences, adjuncts, opposites, signs, etc., so far as is needful to your present purpose. You should survey a question round about and on all sides, and extend your views as far as possible to everything that has a connection with it. This practice has many advantages in it, as 1. It will be a means to suggest to your mind proper topics for argument about any proposition that relates to the same subject. 2. It will enable you, with greater readiness and justness of thought, to give an answer to any sudden question upon that subject, whether it arises in your own mind or be proposed by others. 3. This will instruct you to give a plainer and speedier solution of any difficulties that may attend the theme of your discourse, and to refute the objections of those who have espoused a contrary opinion. 4. By such a large survey of the whole subject in all its properties and relations, you will be better secured from inconsistencies, that is, from asserting or denying anything in one place which contradicts what you have asserted or denied in another. And to attain these ends, an extensiveness of understanding and a large memory are of unspeakable service. One would be ready to wonder sometimes how easily great and wise and learned men are led into assertions in some parts of the same treatise which are found to be scarce consistent with what they have asserted in other places. But the true reason is the narrowness of the mind of man, that it cannot take in all the innumerable properties and relations of one subject with a single view, and therefore, whilst they are intent on one particular part of their theme, they bend all their force of thought to prove or disprove some proposition that relates to that part, without a sufficient attention to the consequences which may flow from it, and which may unhappily affect another part of the same subject, and by this means they are sometimes led to say things which are inconsistent. In such a case, the great dealers in dispute and controversy take pleasure to cast nonsense and self-contradiction on their antagonist with huge and hateful reproaches. For my part, I rather choose to pity human nature, whose necessary narrowness of understanding exposes us all to some degrees of this frailty. But the most extensive survey possible of our whole subject is the best remedy against it. It is our judging and arguing upon a partial view of things that exposes us to mistakes and pushes us into absurdities, or at least to the very borders of them. Rule 3. In searching the knowledge of things, always keep the precise point of the present question in your eye. Take heed that you add nothing to it while you are arguing, nor omit any part of it. Watch carefully lest any new ideas slide in to mingle themselves either with the subject or the predicate. See that the question be not altered by the ambiguity of any word taken in different senses, nor let any secret prejudices of your own, or the sophistical arts of others, cheat your understanding by changing the question, or shuffling in anything else in its room. And for this end it is useful to keep the precise matter of inquiry as simple as may be, and disengaged from a complication of ideas which do not necessarily belong to it. By admitting a complication of ideas and taking too many things at once into one question, the mind is sometimes dazzled and bewildered, and the truth is lost in such a variety and confusion of ideas, whereas by limiting and narrowing the question, you take a fuller survey of the whole of it. By keeping the single point of inquiry in our constant view, we shall be secured from sudden, rash, and impertinent responses and determinations, which some have obtruded instead of solutions and solid answers, before they perfectly knew the question. Rule 4. When you have exactly considered the precise point of inquiry, or what is unknown in the question, then consider what and how much you know already of this question, or of the ideas and terms of which it is composed. It is by a comparison of the known and unknown parts of the question together that you find what reference the part known hath unto, or what connection it hath with the thing that is sought. Those ideas whereby the known and unknown parts of the question are connected will furnish you with middle terms or arguments whereby the thing proposed may be proved or disproved. In this part of your work, namely comparing ideas together, Take due time, and be not too hasty to come to a determination, especially in points of importance. Some men, when they see a little agreement or disagreement between ideas, they presume a great deal, and so jump into a conclusion. This is a short way to fancy, opinion, and conceit, but a most unsafe and uncertain way to true knowledge and wisdom. Rule 5. In choosing your middle terms or arguments to prove any question, always take such topics as are surest and least fallible, and which carry the greatest evidence and strength with them. Be not so solicitous about the number as the weight of your arguments, especially in proving any proposition which admits of natural certainty or of complete demonstration. Many times we do injury to a cause by dwelling upon trifling arguments. We amuse our hearers with uncertainties by multiplying the number of feeble reasonings before we mention those which are more substantial, conclusive, and convincing. And too often we yield up our own assent to mere probable arguments where certain proofs may be obtained. Yet it must be confessed there are many cases wherein the growing number of probable arguments increases the degree of probability and gives a great and sufficient confirmation to the truth which is sought, as 1. When we are inquiring the true sense of any word or phrase, we are more confirmed in the signification of it by finding the same expression so used in several authors or in several places of the same author. 2. When we are searching out the true meaning or opinion of any writer or inquiring into any sacred doctrine of Scripture, we come to a surer determination of the truth by several distinct places wherein the same thing is expressed or plainly implied, because it is not so probable that an honest, skilful reader should mistake the meaning of the writer in many places as he may in one or two. 3. When we would prove the importance of any scriptural doctrine or duty, the multitude of texts, wherein it is repeated and inculcated upon the reader, seems naturally to instruct us that it is a matter of greater importance than other things which are but slightly or singly mentioned in the Bible. 4. In searching out matters of fact in times past or in distant places, in which case moral evidence is sufficient and moral certainty is the utmost which can be attained. Here we derive a greater assurance of the truth of it by a number of persons or a multitude of circumstances concurring to bear witness to it. 5. From many experiments in natural philosophy, we more safely infer a general theorem than we can from one or two. 4. In searching out matters of fact in times past or in distant places, in which case moral evidence is sufficient, and moral certainty is the utmost which can be attained. Here we derive a greater assurance of the truth of it by a number of persons or a multitude of circumstances concurring to bear witness to it. 5. From many experiments in natural philosophy, we more safely infer a general theorem than we can from one or two. 6. In matters which require present practice, both sacred and civil, we must content ourselves oftentimes with a mere preponderation of probable reasons or arguments. Where there are several reasons on each side, for and against a thing that is to be done or omitted, a small argument added to the heap may justly turn the balance on one side and determine the judgment, as I have noted in the second part of Logic. To conclude, a growing acquaintance with matters of learning and a daily improvement of our understandings in affairs human and divine will best teach us to judge and distinguish in what cases the number of arguments adds to their weight and force. It is only experience can fully inform us when we must be determined by probable topics and when we must seek and expect demonstrations. Rule 6. Prove your conclusion as far as possible by some propositions that are in themselves more plain and evident and certain than the conclusion, or at least such as are more known and more intelligible to the person to whom you would convince. If we neglect this rule, we shall endeavor to enlighten that which is obscure by something equally or more obscure, and to confirm that which is doubtful by something equally or more uncertain. Common sense dictates to all men that it is impossible to establish any truth and to convince others of it, but by something that is better known to them than that truth is. Rule 7. Labor in all your arguings to enlighten the understanding as well as to conquer and captivate the judgment. Argue in such a manner as may give a natural, distinct, and solid knowledge of things to your hearers, as well as to force their assent by a mere proof of the question. Now, to attain this end, the chief topic or medium of your demonstration should be fetched as much as possible from the nature of the thing to be proved, or from those things which are most naturally connected with it. Geometricians sometimes break this rule without necessity 2 ways, namely 1. when they prove one proposition only by showing what absurdities will follow if the contradictory proposition be supposed or admitted. This is called reductio ad absurdum. Footnote: this rule chiefly refers to the establishment of some truth rather than to the refutation of error. It is a very common and useful way of arguing, to refute a false proposition by showing what evident falsehood or absurdity would follow from it. For what proposition soever is really absurd and false does effectually prove that principle to be false from which it is derived, so that this way of refuting an error is not so usually called reductio ad absurdum. End footnote. Or demonstratio per impossibile. As for instance, when they prove all the radii of a circle to be equal by supposing one radius to be longer or shorter than another, and then showing what absurd consequences will follow. This, I confess, forces the assent, but does not enlighten the mind by showing the true reason and cause why all radii are equal, which is derived from the very construction of a circle. For since a circle is formed by fixing one end of a straight line in the centre and moving the other end round, or, which is all one, by compasses kept open to a certain extent, it follows evidently that every part of the circumference, being thus described, must be equally distant from the centre, and therefore the radii, which are lines from the centre to the circumference, must be all equal. 2. Geometricians forget this rule when they heap up many far-fetched lines, figures, and proportions to prove some plain, simple, and obvious proposition. This is called a demonstration per aliena et remota, or an argument from unnatural and remote mediums, as if, in order to prove the radii of a circle are all equal, I should make several triangles and squares about the circle, and then, from some properties and propositions of squares and triangles, prove that the radii of a circle are equal. Yet it must be confessed that sometimes such questions happen, that it is hardly possible to prove them by direct arguments drawn from the nature of things, etc. And then it may not only be lawful but necessary to use indirect proofs and arguments drawn from remote mediums, or from the absurdity of the contradictory suppositions. Such indirect and remote arguments may also be sometimes used to confirm a proposition which has been before proved by arguments more direct and immediate. Rule 8. Though arguments should give light to the subject as well as constrain the assent, yet you must learn to distinguish well between an explication and an argument, and neither impose upon yourselves, nor suffer yourselves to be imposed upon by others, by mistaking a mere illustration for a convincing reason. Axioms themselves, or self-evident propositions, may want an explication or illustration, though they are not to be proved by reasoning. Similitudes and allusions have oftentimes a very happy influence to explain some difficult truth and to render the idea of it familiar and easy. Where the resemblance is just and accurate, the influence of a simile may proceed so far as to show the possibility of the thing in question. But similitudes must not be taken as a solid proof of the truth or existence of those things to which they have a resemblance. A too great deference paid to similitudes, or an utter rejection of them, seem to be two extremes and ought to be avoided. The late ingenious Mr. Locke, even in his Inquiries after Truth, makes great use of similes for frequent illustration, and is very happy in the invention of them, though he warns us also lest we mistake them for conclusive arguments. Yet let it be noted here that a parable or a similitude used by any author may give a sufficient proof of the true sense and meaning of that author, provided that we draw not this similitude beyond the scope and design for which it was brought. As when our Saviour affirms, Revelation 3 verse 3, "I will come on thee as a thief," this will plainly prove that he describes the unexpectedness of his appearance, though it is by no means to be drawn to signify any injustice in his design. Rule 9. In your whole course of reasoning, keep your mind sincerely intent on the pursuit of truth, and follow solid argument wheresoever it leads you. Let not a party spirit, nor any passion or prejudice whatsoever, stop or avert the current of your reasoning in quest of true knowledge. When you are inquiring, therefore, into any subject, maintain a due regard to the arguments and objections on both sides of a question. Consider, compare, and balance them well before you determine for one side. It is a frequent, but a very faulty practice, to hunt after arguments only to make good one side of a question, and entirely to neglect and refuse those which favour the other side. If we have not given a due weight to arguments on both sides, we do but wilfully misguide our judgment, and abuse our reason by forbidding its search after truth. when we espouse opinions by a secret bias on the mind, through the influences of fear, hope, honor, credit, interest, or any other prejudice, and then seek arguments only to support those opinions, we have neither done our duty to God nor to ourselves, and it is a matter of mere chance if we stumble upon truth in our way to ease and preferment. The power of reasoning was given us by our Maker for this very end, to pursue truth, and we abuse one of his richest gifts if we basely yield it up to be led astray by any of the meaner powers of nature, or the perishing interests of this life. Reason itself, if honestly obeyed, will lead us to receive the divine revelation of the gospel where it is duly proposed, and this will show us the path of life everlasting. End of section 21. Section 22 of Logic by Isaac Watts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The nature and kinds of method, viz. Natural and arbitrary, synthetic and analytic. Logic, the fourth part. Of disposition and method. It is not merely a clear and distinct idea, a well-formed proposition, or a just argument that is sufficient to search out and communicate the knowledge of a subject. There must be a variety and series of them, disposed in a due manner, in order to attain this end, and therefore it is the design of the last part of logic to teach us the art of method. It is that must secure our thoughts from that confusion, darkness, and mistake which unavoidably attend the meditations and discourses even of the brightest genius who despises the rules of it. 1. We shall here consider the nature of method and the several kinds of it. 2. Lay down the general rules of method with a few particulars under them. Chapter 1. Of the nature of method and the several kinds of it, namely natural and arbitrary, synthetic and analytic. Method, taken in the largest sense, implies the placing of several things or performing several operations in such an order as is most convenient to attain some end proposed. And in this sense it is applied to all the works of nature and art, to all the divine affairs of creation and providence, and to the artifices, schemes, contrivances, and practices of mankind, whether in natural, civil, or sacred affairs. Now this orderly disposition of things, including the ideas of prior, posterior, and simultaneous, of superior, inferior, and equal, of beginning, end, and middle, etc., which are described more particularly among the general affections of being, in ontology. But in logic, method is usually taken for a more limited sense, and the nature of it is thus described. Method is the disposition of a variety of thoughts on any subject, in such order as may best serve to find out unknown truths, to explain and confirm truths that are known, or to fix them in the memory. It is distributed into two general kinds, namely natural and arbitrary. Natural method is that which observes the order of nature, and proceeds in such a manner as that the knowledge of the things which follow depends in a great measure on the things which go before, and this is twofold, viz. Synthetic and analytic, which are sometimes called synthesis and analysis. Synthetic method is that which begins with the parts and leads onward to the knowledge of the whole. It begins with the most simple principles and general truths, and proceeds by degrees to that which is drawn from them, or compounded of them, and therefore it is called the method of composition. Analytic method takes the whole compound as it finds it, whether it be a species or an individual, and leads us into the knowledge of it by resolving it into its first principles or parts, its generic nature and its special properties, and therefore it is called the method of resolution. As synthetic method is generally used in teaching the sciences after they are invented, so analytic is most practiced in finding out things unknown, though it must be confessed that both methods are sometimes employed to find out truth and to communicate it. If we know the parts of any subject easier and better than the whole, we consider the parts distinctly, and by putting them together we come to the knowledge of the whole. So in grammar we learn first to know letters, we join them to make syllables, out of syllables we compose words, and out of words we make sentences and discourses. So the physician or apothecary knows the nature and powers of his simples, namely his drugs, his herbs, his minerals, etc., and putting them together, and considering their several virtues, he finds what will be the nature and powers of the bolus, or any compound medicine. This is the synthetic method. But if we are better acquainted with the whole than we are with particular parts, then we divide or resolve the whole into its parts, and thereby gain a distinct knowledge of them. So in vulgar life we learn in the gross what plants or minerals are, and then by chemistry we gain the knowledge of salt, sulphur, spirit, water, earth, which are the principles of them. So we are first acquainted with the whole body of an animal, and then by anatomy or dissection we come to learn all the inward and outward parts of it. This is the analytic method. According to this most general and obvious idea of synthetic and analytic method, they differ from each other as the way which leads up from a valley to a mountain differs from itself, considered as it leads down from the mountain to the valley, or as St. Matthew and St. Luke prove Christ to be the son of Abraham. Luke finds it out by analysis, rising from Christ to his ancestors. Matthew teaches it in the synthetic method, beginning from Abraham and showing that Christ is found among his posterity. Therefore it is a usual thing in the sciences, when we have by analysis found out a truth, we use the synthetic method to explain and deliver it, and prove it to be true. In this easy view of things, these two kinds of method may be preserved conspicuously and entirely distinct, but the subjects of knowledge being almost infinitely various, it is very difficult and almost impossible always to maintain the precise distinction between these two methods. This will evidently appear in the following observations. Observation 1. Analytic method, being used chiefly to find out things unknown, it is not limited or confined merely to begin with some whole subject and proceed to the knowledge of its parts, but it takes its rise sometimes from any single part or property, or from anything whatsoever that belongs to a subject which happens to be first and most easily known, and thereby inquires into the more abstruse and unknown parts, properties, causes, effects, and modes of it, whether absolute or relative. As for instance, 1. Analysis finds out causes by their effects. So in the speculative part of natural philosophy, when we observe light, colours, motions, hardness, softness, and other properties and powers of bodies, or any of the common or uncommon appearances of things, either on earth or in heaven, we search out the causes of them. So by the various creatures we find out the Creator, and learn his wisdom, power, and goodness. 2. It finds out effects by their causes. So the practical and mechanical part of natural philosophy considers such powers of motion as the wind, the fire, and the water, etc., and then contrives what uses they may be applied to, and what will be their effects in order to make mills and engines of various kinds. 3. It finds out the general and special nature of a thing by considering the various attributes of the individuals, and observing what is common and what is proper, what is accidental and what is essential. So by surveying the colour, the shape, motion, rest, place, solidity, extension of bodies, we come to find that the nature of body in general is solid extension, because all other qualities of bodies are changeable, but this belongs to all bodies, and it endures through all changes, and because this is proper to body alone, and agrees not to anything else, and it is the foundation of all other properties. 4. It finds out the remaining properties or parts of a thing by having some parts or properties given. So the area of a triangle is found by knowing the height and the base. So by having two sides and an angle of a triangle given, we find the remaining side and angles. So when we know cogitation is the prime attribute of a spirit, we infer its immateriality, and thence its immortality. 5. Analysis finds the means necessary to attain a proposed end by having the end first assigned. So in moral, political, economical affairs, having proposed the government of self, a family, a society, or a nation in order to their best interest, we consider and search out what are the proper laws, rules, and means to effect it. So in the practice of artifices and the manufactures of various kinds, the end being proposed, as making cloth, houses, ships, etc., we find out ways of composing these things for the several uses of human life. But the putting any of these means in execution to attain the end is synthetic method. Many other particulars might be represented to show the various forms of analytic method whereby truth is found out, and some of them come very near to synthetic, so as hardly to be distinguished. Observation 2. Not only the investigation of truth, but the communication of it also is often practiced in such a method, as neither agrees precisely to synthetic or analytic. Some sciences, if you consider the whole of them in general, are treated in synthetic order. So physics or natural philosophy begins usually with an account of the general nature and properties of matter or bodies, and by degrees descends to consider the particular species of bodies with their powers and properties. Yet it is very evident that when philosophers come to particular plants or animals, then by chemistry and anatomy they analyze or resolve those bodies into their several constituent parts. On the other hand, logic is begun in analytic method. The whole is divided into its integral parts according to the four operations of the mind, yet here and there synthetic method is used in the particular branches of it, for it treats of ideas in general first, and then descends to the several species of them. It teaches us how propositions are made up of ideas, and syllogisms of propositions, which is the order of composition. The ancient scholastic writers have taken a great deal of pains and engaged in useless disputes about these two methods, and after all have not been able to give such an account of them as to keep them entirely distinct from each other, neither in the theory nor in the practice. Some of the moderns have avoided this confusion in some measure by confining themselves to describe almost nothing else but the synthetic and analytic methods of geometricians and algebraists, whereby they have too much narrowed the nature and rules of method, as though everything were to be treated in mathematical forms. Upon the whole, I conclude that neither of these two methods should be scrupulously and superstitiously pursued either in the invention or in the communication of knowledge. It is enough if the order of nature be but observed in making the knowledge of things following depend on the knowledge of the things which go before. Oftentimes a mixed method will be found most effectual for these purposes, and indeed a wise and judicious prospect of our main end and design must regulate all method whatsoever. Here the rules of natural method ought to be proposed, whether it be analytic or synthetic or mixed. But it is proper first to give some account of arbitrary method, lest it be thrust at too great a distance from the first mention of it. Arbitrary method leaves the order of nature and accommodates itself to many purposes, such as to treasure up things and retain them in memory, to harangue and persuade mankind to any practice in the religious or the civil life, or to delight, amuse, or entertain the mind. As for the assistance of the memory, in most things a natural order has a happy influence, for reason itself, deducing one thing from another, greatly assists the memory by the natural connection and mutual dependence of things. But there are various other methods which mankind have made use of for this purpose, and indeed there are some subjects that can hardly be reduced to analysis or synthesis. In reading or writing history, some follow the order of the governors of a nation, and dispose every transaction under their particular reigns. So the sacred books of kings and chronicles are written. Some write in annals or journals and make a new chapter of every year. Some put all those transactions together which relate to one subject, that is, all the affairs of one war, one league, one confederacy, one council, etc., though it lasted many years and under many rulers. So in writing the lives of men, which is called biography, some authors follow the tract of their years and place everything in the precise order of time when it occurred. Others throw the temper and character of the persons, their private life, their public stations, their personal occurrences, their domestic conduct, their speeches, their books or writings, their sickness and death, into so many distinct chapters. In chronology, some writers make their epochas to begin all with one letter, so in the book called Doctrine Historicus, the periods all begin with C, as creation, cataclysm or deluge, Chaldean Empire, Cyrus, Christ, Constantine, etc. Some divide their accounts of time according to the four great monarchies, Assyrian, Persian, Grecian, and Roman. Others think it serves the memory best to divide all their subjects into the remarkable number of sevens. So Prideaux has written an introduction to history, and there is a book of divinity called Fasciculus Controversarium by an author of the same name, written in the same method, wherein every controversy has 7 questions belonging to it, though the order of nature seems to be too much neglected by a confinement to this septenary number. Those writers and speakers whose chief business is to amuse or delight, to allure or terrify, or persuade mankind, do not confine themselves to any natural order, but in a cryptical or hidden method adapt everything to their designed ends. Sometimes they omit those things which might injure their design or grow tedious to their hearers, though they seem to have a necessary relation to the point in hand. Sometimes they add those things which have no great reference to the subject, but are suited to allure or refresh the mind and the ear. They dilate sometimes and flourish long upon little incidents, and they skip over and but lightly touch the drier parts of their theme. They place the first things last and the last things first with wondrous art, and yet so manage it as to conceal their artifice and lead the senses and passions of their hearers into a pleasing and powerful captivity. It is chiefly poesy and oratory that require the practice of this kind of arbitrary method. They omit things essential which are not beautiful, they insert little needless circumstances and beautiful digressions, they invert times and actions in order to place everything in the most affecting light, and for this end, in their practice, they neglect all logical forms. Yet a good acquaintance with the forms of logic and natural method is of admirable use to those who would attain these arts in perfection. Hereby they will be able to range their thoughts in such a method and scheme as to take a more large and comprehensive survey of their subject and design in all the parts of it, and by this means they will better judge what to choose and what to refuse, and how to dress and manage the whole scene before them, so as to attain their own ends with greater glory and success. End of section 22. Section 23 of Logic by Isaac Watts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. General and Special Rules of Method. Chapter 2. The Rules of Method, General and Particular. The general requisites of true method in the pursuit or communication of knowledge may be all comprised under the following heads. It must be 1. Safe, 2. Plain and easy, 3. Distinct, 4. Full or without defect, 5. Short or without superfluity, 6. Proper to the subject and the design, 7. Connected. Rule 1. Among all the qualifications of a good method, there is none more necessary and important than that it should be safe and secure from error, and to this end these 4 particular or special directions should be observed. 1. Use great care and circumspection in laying the foundations of your discourse or your scheme of thoughts upon any subject. Those propositions which are to stand as first principles and on which the whole argument depends must be viewed on all sides with the utmost accuracy, lest an error, being admitted there, should diffuse itself through the whole subject. See therefore that your general definitions or descriptions are as accurate as the nature of the thing will bear. See that your general divisions and distributions be just and exact, according to the rules given in the first part of Logic. See that your axioms be sufficiently evident, so as to demand the assent of those that examine them with due attention. See that your first and more immediate consequences from these principles be well drawn, and take the same care of all other propositions that have a powerful and spreading influence through the several parts of your discourse. For want of this care, sometimes a large treatise has been written by a long deduction of consequences from 1 or 2 doubtful principles, which principles have been effectually refuted in a few lines, and thus the whole treatise has been destroyed at once. So the largest and fairest building sinks and tumbles to the ground, if the foundations and cornerstones of it are feeble and insufficient. 2. It is a very advisable thing that your primary and fundamental propositions be not only evident and true, but they should be made a little familiar to the mind by dwelling upon them before you proceed farther. By this means you will gain so full an acquaintance with them that you may draw consequences from them with much more freedom, with greater variety, brighter evidence, and with a firmer certainty than if you have but a slight and sudden view of them. 3. As you proceed in the connection of your arguments, see that your ground be made firm in every step. See that every link of your chain of reasoning be strong and good. For if but one link be feeble and doubtful, the whole chain of arguments feels the weakness of it, and lies exposed to every objector, and the original question remains undetermined. 4. Draw up all your propositions and arguments with so much caution, and express your ideas with such a just limitation as may preclude or anticipate any objections. Yet remember this is only to be done as far as it is possible, without too much entangling the question or introducing complicated ideas and obscuring the sense. But if such a cautious and limited dress of the question should render the ideas too much complicated, or the sense obscure, then it is better to keep the argument more simple, clear, and easy to be understood, and afterwards mention the objections distinctly in their full strength, and give a distinct answer to them. Rule 2. Let your method be plain and easy, so that your hearers or readers, as well as yourself, may run through it without embarrassment, and may take a clear and comprehensive view of the whole scheme. To this end, the following particular directions will be useful. 1. Begin always with those things which are best known and most obvious, whereby the mind may have no difficulty or fatigue, and proceed by regular and easy steps to things that are more difficult. And as far as possible, let not the understanding or the proof of any of your positions depend on the positions that follow, but always on those which go before. It is a matter of wonder that, in so knowing an age as this, there should be so many persons offering violence daily to this rule by teaching the Latin language by a grammar written in Latin, which method seems to require a perfect knowledge of an unknown tongue in order to learn the first rudiments of it. 2. Do not affect excessive haste in learning or teaching any science, nor hurry at once into the midst of it, lest you be too soon involved in several new and strange ideas and propositions, which cannot be well understood without a longer and close attention to those which go before. Such sort of speed is but a waste of time, and will constrain you to take many steps backward again, if you would arrive at a regular and complete knowledge of the subject. 3. Be not fond of crowding too many thoughts and reasonings into one sentence or paragraph beyond the apprehension or capacity of your readers or hearers. There are some persons of a good genius and a capacious mind, who write and speak very obscurely upon this account. They affect a long train of dependencies before they come to a period. They imagine that they can never fill their page with too much sense, but they little think how they bury their own best ideas in the crowd, and render them in a manner invisible and useless to the greatest part of mankind. Such men may be great scholars, yet they are but poor teachers. 4. For the same reason, avoid too many subdivisions. Contrive your scheme of thoughts in such a manner as may finish your whole argument with as few inferior branchings as reason will admit. And let them be such as are obvious and open to the understanding, that they may come within one single view of the mind. This will not only assist the understanding to receive, but it will aid the memory also to retain truth, whereas a discourse cut out into a vast multitude of gradual subordinations has many inconveniences in it. It gives pain to the mind and memory in surveying and retaining the scheme of discourse, and exposes the unskilful hearers to mingle the superior and inferior particulars together. It leads them into a thick wood instead of open daylight, and places them in a labyrinth instead of a plain path. 5. Give all diligence in your younger years to obtain a clear and easy way of expressing your conceptions, that your words, as fast as you utter them, may stamp your own ideas exactly on the mind of the hearer. This is a most happy talent for the conveyance of truth, and an excellent security against mistakes and needless controversies. Rule 3. Let your method be distinct and without the perplexing mixture of things that ought to be kept separate, and this will be easily practiced by 4 directions. 1. Do not bring unnecessary heterogeneous matter into your discourse on any subject. Footnote. Things of one kind are called homogeneous, things of different kinds are called heterogeneous. End footnote. That is, do not mingle an argument on one subject with matters that relate entirely to another, but just so far as is necessary to give a clearer knowledge of the subject in hand. Examples in logic may be borrowed from any of the sciences to illustrate the rules, but long interpositions of natural philosophy, of the imagination and passions, of agency of spirits united to bodies, etc., break the thread of discourse and perplex the subject. 2. Let every complicated theme or idea be divided into its distinct single parts, as far as the nature of the subject and your present design requires it. Though you must not abound in needless subdivisions, yet something of this work is very necessary, and it is a good judgment alone can dictate how far to proceed in it and when to stop. Compound ideas must be reduced to a simple form in order to understand them well. You may easily master that subject in all the parts of it by a regular succession, which would confound the understanding to survey them at once. So we come to the knowledge of a very perplexed diagram in geometry, or a complicated machine in mechanics, by having it parcelled out to us into its several parts and principles, according to this and the foregoing rule of method. 3. Call every idea, proposition, and argument to its proper class, and keep each part of the subject in its own place. Put those things all together that belong to one part or property, one consideration or view of your subject. This will prevent needless repetitions and keep you from intermixing things which are different. We must maintain this distinction of things and places if we would be safe from error. It is confusion that leads us into endless mistakes, which naturally arise from a variety of ideas, ill-joined, sorted, or ill-disposed. It is one great use of method that a multitude of thoughts and propositions may be so distinctly ranged in their proper situations that the mind may not be overwhelmed with a confused attention to them all at once, nor be distracted with their variety, nor be tempted to unite things which ought to be separated, nor to disjoin things which should be united. 4. In the partition of your discourse into distinct heads, take heed that your particulars do not interfere with the general, nor with each other. Think it is not enough that you make use of distinct expressions in each particular, but take care that the ideas be distinct also. It is mere foolery to multiply distinct particulars in treating of things where the difference of your particulars lies only in names and words. Rule 4. The method of treating a subject should be plenary or full, so that nothing may be wanting. Nothing which is necessary or proper should be omitted. When you are called to explain a subject, do not pass by nor skip over anything in which it is very difficult or obscure. When you enumerate the parts or the properties of any subject, do it in a complete and comprehensive manner. When you are asserting or proving any truth, see that every doubtful or disputable part of the argument be well supported and confirmed. If you are to illustrate or argue a point of difficulty, be not too scanty of words, but rather become a little copious and effusive in your language. Set the truth before the reader in several lights, turn the various sides of it to view, in order to give a full idea and firm evidence of the proposition. When you are drawing up a narrative of any matter of fact, see that no important circumstance be omitted. When you can propose the solution of any difficulty, consider all the various cases wherein it can happen, and show how they may be solved. In short, let your enumerations, your divisions and distributions of things be so accurate that no needful part or idea may be left out. This fullness of method does not require that everything should be said which can be said upon any subject, for this would make each single science endless, but you should say everything which is necessary to the design in view, and which has a proper and direct tendency to this end, always proportioning the amplitude of your matter and the fullness of your discourse to your great design, to the length of your time, to the convenience, delight, and profit of your hearers. Rule 5. As your method must be full without deficiency, so it must be short or without superfluity. The fullness of a discourse enlarges our knowledge, and the well-concerted brevity saves our time. In order to observe this rule, it will be enough to point out the chief of those superfluities or redundancies which some persons are guilty of in their discourses, with a due caution against them. 1. Avoid all needless repetitions of the same thing in different parts of your discourse. It must be confessed there are several cases wherein a review of the same foregoing proposition is needful to explain or prove several of the following positions. But let your method be so contrived, as far as possible, that it may occasion the fewest rehearsals of the same thing, for it is not grateful to the hearers without evident necessity. 2. Have a care of tedious prolixity, or drawing out any part of your discourse to an unnecessary and tiresome length. It is much more honourable for an instructor, an orator, a pleader, or a preacher, that his hearers should say, "I was afraid he would have done," than that they should be tempted to show signs of uneasiness and long for the conclusion. Besides, there is another inconvenience in it. When you affect to amplify on the former branches of a discourse, you will often lay a necessity upon yourself of contracting the latter and most useful parts of it, and perhaps prevent yourself in the most important part of your design. Many a preacher has been guilty of this fault in former days, nor is the present age without some instances of this weakness. 3. Do not multiply explications where there is no difficulty, or darkness, or danger of mistake. Be not fond of tracing every word of your theme through all the grammatical, the logical, and metaphysical characters and relations of it, nor show your critical learning in spreading abroad the various senses of a word, and the various origin of those senses, the etymology of terms, the synonymous and the paronymous or kindred names, etc., where the chief point of discourse does not at all require it. You would laugh at a pedant who, professing to explain the Athanasian Creed, should acquaint you that Athanasius is derived from a Greek word which signifies immortality, and that the same word, athanasia, signifies also the herb tansy. There are some persons so fond of their learned distinctions that they will show their subtlety by distinguishing where there is no difference, and the same silly affectation will introduce distinctions upon every occurrence, and bring 3 or 4 negatives upon every subject of discourse, first to declare what it is not, and then what it is, whereas such negatives ought never to be mentioned where there is no apparent danger of mistake. How ridiculous would that writer be who, if he was speaking of the Nicene Creed, should declare negatively, 1. That he did not mean the doctrine which the inhabitants of Nice believed, nor 2. A creed written by them, but 3. Positively a creed composed by several Christian bishops met together in the city of Nice. The positive is sufficient here, and the 2 negatives are impertinent. 4. Be not fond of proving those things which need no proof, such as self-evident propositions and truths universally confessed, or such as are entirely agreed to and granted by our opponents. It is this vain affectation of proving everything that has led geometricians to form useless and intricate demonstrations to support some theorems which are sufficiently evident to the eye by inspection, or to the mind by the first mention of them. And it is the same humour that reigns sometimes in the pulpit, and spends half the sermon in probing some general truth which is never disputed or doubted, and thereby robs the auditory of more useful entertainment. 5. As there are some things so evidently true that they want no proof, so there are others so evidently false that they want no refutation. It is mere trifling, and a waste of our precious moments, to invent and raise such objections as no man would ever make in earnest, and that merely for the sake of answering and solving them. This breaks in notoriously upon the due brevity of method. 6. Avoid in general all learned forms, all trappings of art, and ceremonies of the schools, where there is no need of them. It is reported concerning the late Tsar of Muscovy that when he first acquainted himself with mathematical learning, he practiced all the rules of circumvallation and contravallation at the siege of a town in Livonia, and by the length of those formalities he lost the opportunity of taking the town. 7. Do not suffer every occasional and incidental thought to carry you away into a long parenthesis, and thus to stretch out your discourse and divert you from the point in hand. In the pursuit of your subject, if any useful thought occur which belongs to some other theme, note it down for the sake of your memory on some other paper, and lay it by in reserve for its proper place and season, but let it not incorporate itself with your present theme, nor draw off your mind from your main business, though it should be ever so inviting. A man who walks directly but slowly towards his journey's end will arrive thither much sooner than his neighbour, who runs into every crooked turning which he meets, and wanders aside to gaze at everything that strikes his eyes by the way, or to gather every gaudy flower that grows by the side of the road. To sum up all, there is a happy medium to be observed in our method, so that the brevity may not render the sense obscure, nor the argument feeble, nor our knowledge merely superficial, and on the other hand, that the fullness and copiousness of our method may not waste the time, tire the learner, or fill the mind with trifles and impertinences. The copious and the contracted way of writing have each their peculiar advantages. There is a proper use to be made of large paraphrases and full, particular, and diffusive explications and arguments. These are fittest for those who design to be acquainted thoroughly with every part of the subject. There is also a use of shorter hints, abstracts, and compendiums, to instruct those who seek only a slight and general knowledge, as well as to refresh the memory of those who have learnt the science already and gone through a larger scheme. But it is a gross abuse of these various methods of instruction when a person has read a mere compendium or epitome of any science, and he vainly imagines that he understands the whole science. So one boy may become a philosopher by reading over the mere dry definitions and divisions of Scheibler's Compendium of Peripateticism. So another may boast that he understands anatomy because he has seen a skeleton, and a third profess himself a learned divine when he can repeat the Apostles' Creed. Rule 6. Take care that your method be proper to the subject in hand, proper to your present design, as well as proper to the age and place wherein you dwell. 1. Let your method be proper to the subject. All sciences must not be learnt or taught in one method. Morality and theology, metaphysics and logic will not be easily and happily reduced to a strict mathematical method. Those who have tried have found much inconvenience therein. Some things have more need to be explained than to be proved, as axioms or self-evident propositions, and indeed all the first great principles, the chief and most important doctrines both of natural and revealed religion, for when the sense of them is clearly explained, they appear so evident in the light of nature or scripture that they want no other proof. There are other things that stand in need of proof as well as explication, as many mathematical theorems and several deep controversies in morality and divinity. There are yet other sorts of subjects which want rather to be warmly impressed upon the mind by fervent exhortations, and stand in more need of this than they do either of proof or explication. Such are the most general, plain, and obvious duties of piety towards God and love towards men, with the government of all our inclinations and passions. Now these several subjects ought to be treated in a different manner and method. Again, there are some subjects in the same treatise which are more useful and necessary than others, and some parts of a subject which are eminently and chiefly designed by a writer or speaker. True method will teach us to dwell longer upon these themes, and to lay out more thought and language upon them, whereas the same art of method will teach us to cut short those things which are used only to introduce our main subject, and to stand as a scaffolding merely to aid the structure of our discourse. It will teach us also to content ourselves with brief hints of those matters which are merely occasional and incidental. 2. Your method must be adjusted to your design, for if you treat of the same subject with 2 different views and designs, you will find it necessary to use different methods. Suppose the doctrine of the Sacred Trinity were your theme, and you were to read a lecture to young students on that subject, or if you designed a treatise for the conviction of learned men, you would pursue a very different method from that which would be proper to regulate a practical discourse, or a sermon to instruct common Christians merely in the pious improvement of this doctrine, and awaken them to the duties which are derived thence. In short, we must not first lay down certain and precise rules of method, and resolve to confine the matter we discourse of to that particular form and order of topics, but we must well consider and study the subject of our discourse thoroughly, and take a just survey of our present design, and these will give sufficient hints of the particular form and order in which we should handle it, provided that we are moderately skilled in the general laws of method and order. Yet let it be noted here that neither the subject nor matter of a discourse, nor the particular design of it, can so precisely determine the method as to leave no room for liberty and variety. The very same theme may be handled, and that also with the same design, in several different methods, among which it is hard to say which is the best. In writing a system of divinity, some begin with the Scriptures, and thence deduce all other doctrines and duties. Some begin with the being of God and his attributes, so far as he is known by the light of nature, and then proceed to the doctrines of revelation. Some distinguish the whole subject into credenda and agenda, that is, things to be believed and things to be done. Some think it best to explain the whole Christian religion by an historical detail of all the discoveries which God has made of himself to this lower world, beginning at the creation in the first chapter of Genesis, and so proceeding onward according to the narrative of the Old and New Testament. And there are others that endeavour to include the whole of religion under these 4 heads, namely the Apostles' Creed, the Lord's Prayer, the 10 Commandments, and the 2 Sacraments. Though I cannot but think this is the least accurate of any. The same variety may be allowed in treating other subjects. This very treatise of Logic is an instance of it, whose method differs very considerably from any others which I have seen, as they differ also greatly from one another, though several of them are confessed to be very well written. 3. Though a just view of our subject and our design may dictate proper rules of natural method, yet there must be some little deference at least paid to the custom of the age wherein we live, and to the humour and genius of our readers or hearers, which, if we utterly reject and disdain, our performances will fail of the desired success, even though we may have followed the just rules of method. I will mention but this one instance. In the former century it was frequent with learned men to divide their theme or subject into a great multitude of coordinate members or parts. They abounded also in the forms of logic and distinction, and indulged numerous ranks of subordination. Now, though we ought not to abandon the rules of just method and division in order to comport with the modish writers in our age who have renounced them, yet it is prudent to pay so much respect to the custom of the age as to use these forms of division with due moderation, and not affect to multiply them in such a manner as to give an early and needless disgust to the generality of our present readers. The same may be said concerning various other methods of conduct in the affairs of learning, as well as the affairs of life, wherein we must indulge a little to custom, and yet we must by no means suffer ourselves so far to be imposed upon and governed by it, as to neglect those rules of method which are necessary for the safe, easy, and complete inquiry into truth, or the ready and effectual communication of it to others. Rule 7. The last requisite of method is that the parts of a discourse should be well connected, and these 3 short directions will suffice for this purpose. 1. Keep your main end and design ever in view, and let all the parts of your discourse have a tendency towards it, and as far as possible make that tendency visible all the way. Otherwise the readers or hearers will have reason to wonder for what end this or that particular was introduced. 2. Let the mutual relation and dependence of the several branches of your discourse be so just and evident that every part may naturally lead onward to the next, without any huge chasms or breaks which interrupt and deform the scheme. The connection of truths should arise and appear in their successive ranks and order, as the several parts of a fine prospect ascend just behind each other in their natural and regular elevations and distances, and invite the eye to climb onward with constant pleasure till it reach the sky. Whatsoever horrid beauty or precipice or cataract may add to the prospect of a country, yet such sort of hideous and abrupt appearances in a scene of reasoning are real blemishes and not beauties. When the reader is passing over such a treatise, he often finds a wide vacancy, and makes an uneasy stop, and knows not how to transport his thoughts over to the next particular, for want of some clue or connecting idea to lay hold of. 3. Acquaint yourself with all the proper and decent forms of transition from one part of a discourse to another, and practice them as occasion offers. Where the ideas, propositions, and arguments are happily disposed and well connected, the truth indeed is secure, but it renders the discourse much more agreeable when proper and graceful expression joins the parts of it together in so entertaining a manner that the reader knows not how to leave off till he hath arrived at the end. These are the general and most important rules of true method, and though they belong chiefly to the communication of knowledge, yet an early and thorough acquaintance with them will be of considerable use towards the pursuit and attainment of it. Those persons who have never any occasion to communicate knowledge by writing or by public discourses may also, with great advantage, peruse these rules of method, that they may learn to judge with justice and accuracy concerning the performances of others. And besides, a good acquaintance with method will greatly assist everyone in ranging, disposing, and managing all human affairs. The particular means or method for a farther improvement of the understanding are very various, such as meditation, reading, conversing, disputing by speech or by writing, question and answer, etc. And in each of these practices some special forms may be observed, and special rules may be given to facilitate and secure our inquiries after truth. But this would require a little volume by itself, and a treatise of logic has always been esteemed sufficiently complete without it. End of section 23. End of Logic by Isaac Watts.